Income Tax Jersey Law P54, lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. The main respondent, I think, will be Deputy Renouf, who was chair of the subcommittee in this regard, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Multinational Corporate Income Tax Jersey Law 2000, a law to impose a corporate income tax in respect of entities that are members of large multinational enterprise groups and for connected purposes. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
So I'm pleased to propose this important legislation on the implementation of Pillar 2 in Jersey. Pillar 2 is the international OECD tax initiative that introduces a new 15% minimum effective corporate income tax rate on the profits of large multinational groups. Its technical name is GLOBE, which stands for Global Anti-Base Erosion Regime, but it is better known around the world as Pillar 2. Pillar 2 has been designed by the OECD to ensure that large in-scope multinational groups with total global turnover of at least 150 million euros pay a minimum effective corporate income tax rate of 15% in every jurisdiction in which they operate. Where the local tax paid by Pillar 2 groups in any jurisdiction is less than 15%, the group will be subject to a top-up tax in another Pillar 2 implementing jurisdiction. Where this top-up takes place is determined in accordance with the agreed OECD Pillar 2 rule order. This means that absent today's legislation, in-scope groups which are currently paying 0 or 10 in Jersey would see the tax charged on their Jersey profits topped up to 15% in another jurisdiction or jurisdictions. So if the outcome of this new international OECD initiative is that 15% corporate income tax is payable on Jersey profits, then the government is clear that this 15% rate should be paid in Jersey. And that is why the Treasury Ministerial team is bringing forward this package of legislation, which is the law that we are currently debating and the next one, P53. Passing this legislation to introduce Pillar 2 for large in-scope multinational groups will be another key milestone in Jersey's long-term commitment to align with international standards and tax initiatives. Supporting this agenda is critical for our international reputation as a cooperative jurisdiction which provides certainty, stability, and a competitive environment for businesses that invest in and operate here. Jersey is implementing Pillar 2 through two interconnected pieces of legislation, as I've just said. Firstly, a new standalone multinational corporate income tax that I'll refer to here on in as MSIT, to sit alongside Jersey's existing income tax regime. This is the P54. And secondly, the income inclusion rule, which I'll refer to from here on in as the IIR, which is P53. In common with many other jurisdictions internationally, Jersey will not be enacting the undertaxed profit rule in Pillar 2 that would apply to non-Jersey profits. We believe that this rule would introduce an element of extraterritorial taxation that would not support our overall policy objectives as an international finance centre. The legislation for the MSIT and the IOR both align with the OECD common approach to Pillar 2 as set out in the Globe Model Rules and Commentary. Jersey's legislative package is the right Pillar 2 approach for Jersey, because every jurisdiction is making their Pillar 2 implementation choices based on their individual economic context. And I'm confident that the MSIT and the IIR legislation presented here today is the right choice for Jersey. Its design is the outcome of 2 years' careful consideration that has included sustained engagement with the OECD process as the model rules, commentary and guidance have evolved. Jersey is, of course, a member of the OECD steering group to the inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting, and Revenue Jersey officials have also attended hundreds of OECD working party discussions. detailed data analysis of the Pillar 2 population by Revenue Jersey to gain a deeper understanding of the financial profile and priorities of the largest multinational groups that are here in Jersey, and extensive stakeholder engagement by government officials and the ministerial team, both in Jersey and overseas. This engagement has been multi-layered with industry and their advisors at both an intergovernmental level and with the wider public through the policy reflections paper and a number of public statements by the government throughout both 2023 and 2024. But I just remind the Assembly there will be no change to 010 or to Jersey's long-standing policy of tax neutrality. We are not changing our tax regime as the result of the propositions being debated today. Less than 5% of entities in Jersey will be affected by the rollout of the OECD Pillar 2 initiative across the globe. Pillar 2 only covers entities that are part, as I've said, of large multinational groups with global turnovers of 750 million euros and above. The remaining, which is just over 95% of Jersey entities, will remain subject to the current income tax rules, and in particular the 010 regime will still apply to the vast majority of companies because they will not be in scope for Pillar 2. 010 is a competitive system that offers tax neutrality and has worked well for Jersey. It is underpinned by international standards, including economic substance rules that are peer-reviewed by the OECD and the EU every year. Jersey has always been and continues to be fully compliant with these rules. So, Pillar 2 is a very technical tax project, and I appreciate that that of course makes it challenging to scrutinise. Treasury has worked with the CSSP and the IAE panels for the past 2 years on the key principles and designs of Jersey's Pillar 2 implementation. But I know that the legislation has only been available to the sub-panel for a matter of weeks since August, and it is difficult to scrutinise such legislation in this time frame. And therefore I'd like to thank Scrutiny for all their work in producing their report. We are reviewing their findings and recommendations, and we will revert to the sub-panel in due course. Jersey is a competitive international finance centre with a global book of business. Financial services are the bedrock of our economy, and as the ministerial team, we are pleased to have created a new international competitiveness political working group. This is a ministerial cross-cutting group that is supported by a number of senior government officials. It also has representation from the regulator and from industry through Jersey Finance and Digital Jersey. It is undertaking a review of our competitiveness strategy in a post-Pillar 2 world in parallel with the rollout of any possible quick wins that will make a difference to the financial services sector in the short term. One of these early actions is already underway in the design of a new Pillar 2 qualified refundable tax credit. Officials are working with industry and advisors on an innovative QRTC that will be effective in incentivising business growth and deepening business ties with Jersey. Pillar 2 is a highly complex new global tax regime both for in-scope groups and for tax administrations. The way that jurisdictions respond to the challenge of Pillar 2 implementation and the provision of taxpayer support will be an important differentiating factor for success. Jersey has a long-standing corporate income tax regime. Revenue Jersey is an experienced and capable tax administration that has been well resourced by this Assembly to deal with international tax matters and should continue to be provided with resources for IT development and personnel through the rollout of Pillar 2. And the Treasury Minister, of course, will speak more about this in her intervention later. There will be new administrative burdens for groups that are in scope of Pillar 2. These burdens are created by the compliance requirements of the global regime itself and not by Jersey's implementation of it. Revenue Jersey is committed to providing taxpayers with the support they need and to keep the Pillar 2 administrative burden in Jersey as low as possible within the boundaries of the OECD rules. So I know that this is complex and this is, at this stage, just the principles, but I am confident that Jersey is well positioned to implement this new Pillar 2 regime and to make it a success. And therefore, sir, I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I stand and rise to say that I welcome and support this draft law and this stage in the principles, and to commend the work of the Treasury and External Relations and the ministers that have been involved in the finalisation of this. And in so explaining my support, to say how fortunate indeed we are to have got the scale and size of organisations based in Jersey that are, as the Assistant Minister, well, it's the Minister, I think, proposing it, as the Minister said, the types of businesses that are going to be in scope for this are incredibly large multinationals, and the fact that they are, whilst we can't refer directly to the individual businesses or entities because it would breach tax confidentiality, it is, if I may say, a real feather in the cap of Jersey that we actually have those institutions in Jersey. And the fact that we not only have attracted them in recent years, we've kept them. And how jolly lucky, if I may say, this Assembly is to have secured their presence. And whilst we can take nothing for granted, sir, the amounts of revenue that will arise, we hope, because of it, are going to provide this Assembly with the unexpected fill-up, call it a windfall, if you like, sir, that is just going to be absolutely fundamental to the government in its abilities to try and balance the books in the next few years. The Treasury has set out a plan as to what to do subject to this Assembly's approval and the various different global agreements, etc., that must happen. But the numbers are bold. They are large numbers. They are not to be taken for granted. They are not to be taken lightly. And in my opinion, they should not be spent and relied upon. They should be put away and salted away to the maximum extent possible. And that is effectively what the Minister is proposing in the other related proposition that is intrinsically part of this, which is the budget. I think the Minister, if anything, sir, has been too giving in terms of the money. If one were to go back to the foundations of the Strategic Reserve, then this is exactly the kind of money that is an unexpected windfall that should be salted away and put either in the stabilisation fund, which is now at virtually nothing, because we've had to spend it. Good job we've created it and used it at the time. But it's going to be very tempting for ministers to put pressure on the Treasury Minister and the Treasury to spend this money. And I would urge members to support this in its principles and the detail that's going to come on to, but to be realistic and to be cautious about this golden goose that is continuing to lay golden eggs. If it is plucked too much, if it is not fed, if it is not looked after, it will fly away. And we are now in a globally competitive situation in a way that we've never been before, because the companies that will be paying this tax have got choices. It is no longer going to be the case with this law being adopted that they're going to have another jurisdiction where they will get a better and lower rate of tax. That means that that business is going to be looking for other reasons to stay and to continue to use Jersey and favour Jersey to, if I might say, the Minister is probably a little modest, and they need to be, because of the very nature of the confidentiality of who these players are, but these are really good quality international businesses, which are here because of the very reasons that we have a lot to be proud of in Jersey. We're a trusted, mature, proper jurisdiction that is of the highest standards in all aspects of its administration. We will just draw a bit of a veil over the JFSC issues, but they can be fixed with the right action. But in terms of the judicial decisions that are taken, sir, in a place that you sit sometimes when you're not here, the quality of our judiciary, the quality of the services, the quality of the, dare I say it, the Assembly's decisions making, being prudent, being fiscally responsible, they are all very important factors as to the reasons why Jersey has got these kind of international organisations in Jersey and undertaking and using our financial services sector. But it mustn't not be taken for granted. This is the right legislation. It's being worked on very carefully by the Treasury officials, and I know that the Minister, in summing up, may offer his and the Treasury Minister's congratulations to the individuals in both the Treasury and External Relations who have done this Assembly and the island a great service in terms of crafting this particular approach to dealing with this global tax agreement by the OECD. It's a really innovative and really carefully and really cleverly done way. There's no tricks or anything. It's actually really very cleverly put together, and I know scrutinised it. But what I would say to members is, please don't think that in adopting this and looking forward to the revenue that will arise from it, that that is automatically going to stay here and carry on coming and laying those golden eggs that this Assembly so desperately needs because of its problems in public finances and not being able to fund the hospital and all the other things that the government of the day that we have at the moment wants to spend on. It's not going to necessarily continue to be that way in the future, and I wouldn't bank on it. But what I would do is I would salt it away and put it away in the strategic reserve, as the Minister has said, and the Stabilisation Fund, and don't spend it unless we absolutely have to. So in those supportive words, but those cautionary words, I hope members, and I am somebody that has had quite a lot to do with this and the evolution of this since the very start. I don't think I would have imagined a situation where there would be international agreement of a minimum global rate of tax, even 5-10 years ago. I don't think it would have even been something that one would be considering. It's happening, it's got consequences, and I think Jersey, well positioned, is capable of continuing to serve these global organisations and serve them well and serve them with pride. But let's not take it for granted. And it is unexpected free money that we ourselves here, apart from the money, the work that's been done by the Treasury and the finance industry, that this is money that we didn't expect. It's a good job we've got it, but don't take it for granted, because it won't necessarily stay here if this Assembly doesn't give the impression that we have stable government and responsible government and fiscal prudent government. And I hope those observations are helpful from somebody that's been involved quite a long time in this.
Deputy Sharon.
Thank you, sir. Pillar 2 introduces a global minimum tax, and this should be a game changer. As we heard from the Minister, it sets a floor on corporate taxes, levelling the playing field for countries and companies alike. By reducing the incentive for profit shifting, it addresses a long-standing issue of large multinational corporations being able to shift profits to low-tax jurisdictions, often avoiding paying their fair share of taxes in the countries where they generate significant revenue. This has affected both developed and developing nations alike. This practice of profit shifting has created an imbalance where small businesses, operating solely within their home countries, end up being taxed at higher rates than giant corporations. This is not just unfair, it's unsustainable. This move should safeguard national tax revenues, enabling governments to better fund public services, healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social programmes that are critical to citizens' well-being and helping to close that inequality gap. But also, especially for developing countries, it can reduce the reliance on aid while helping lift many out of poverty in a more long-term, sustainable way. Corporate income tax is essential for revenue raising in developing countries. Developing countries are especially exposed to profit shifting and tax competition. Estimates in 2023 reach $480 billion in lost revenue. This is over double the amount that flows into developing countries in the form of aid, which is $223 billion. So more than double is lost in revenue. They have more limited alternatives for raising revenue, and their limited administrative capacity are now stretched further by increased complexity. For them, securing the tax base on inward investment is key. This reform should generate more revenues for developing countries, vital to reach Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and face the current climate and debt crisis. Make no mistake, aid alone will never be enough to accomplish this. Take, for example, Zambia, a country rich in natural resources, but receiving minimal tax revenues from foreign companies extracting its wealth. In 2011, 5 companies produced copper worth over $4.2 billion, but paid only a fraction of taxes. This loss of revenue is crippling for a country where these funds are desperately needed for not only lifting people out of poverty, but for education, healthcare, and infrastructure. One of these companies is registered in London with some subsidiaries registered in Jersey. It manages 3 copper mines in Zambia and has had to deal with high-profile cases regarding water pollution, environmental mismanagement, and how it treats its labour force. It generated $1.7 billion in revenue and an operating profit of $221 million in 2011-2012, yet only paid in taxes to Zambia roughly about $11,000. But Pillar 2 is not just about tax reform, it's about fairness, a major shift in global governance, reflecting a growing consensus that all businesses, regardless of size or location, should contribute equitably to the economies that support them. And there is potentially more to come, with advanced discussions at the UN to develop a UN tax convention, a global framework for international tax cooperation, and discussions at the G20 to tackle taxation of the super rich. For countries like Jersey, the global minimum tax represents an opportunity to change the narrative. By embracing Pillar 2 and evolving its tax practices, Jersey can develop its governance expertise, particularly in areas of sustainability and responsible finance. This shift could attract a new generation of skilled professionals and boost productivity through innovation and tech-driven solutions. Global expectations are evolving rapidly, and jurisdictions that fail to adapt to these shifts risk falling behind and losing their competitive edge. This is why I feel it's particularly important that a sizable amount of the forecasted Pillar 2 tax receipts should not just go to improve the competitiveness of the island, as outlined in the draft budget 2025, but be specifically focused in developing and strengthening our sustainable and responsible finance offering. And it's not just me saying this. The Jersey Sustainable Finance Consultation concluded the opportunities this would have for Jersey. It would reverse a period, in the words of the consultation report, it says it would reverse a period of slow decline in our IFC and to change the narrative around Jersey's contribution to the global economy. It would retain existing but also attract more skilled resources to the financial services industry, especially the younger generations, and it would increase productivity by adopting innovative tech-driven solutions to ESG, that's environmental, social and governance challenges, and upskilling our workforce as a centre of ESG expertise in our chosen markets. And it would develop governance expertise with a sustainability dimension. So this is not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about pushing for meaningful systemic change. And ultimately, it's about people, as a basis, ensuring they have access to education, healthcare, and clean water, and funding the critical climate action needed for a sustainable future. It's about understanding our impact in Jersey on the rest of the world and doing our part to ensure that there can be a sustainable future for all.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I'll start by saying that in the run-up to this debate, we had a quick discussion amongst members of the scrutiny panel as to what would happen if I was unable to attend this state sitting. And in this situation, my vice chair, Deputy Tadyer, would have been called by you, sir. I can tell members that Deputy Tadyer's eyes lit up as he immediately spotted the potential as chief responder he would not have been subjected to time limits. I think I remember him saying that 45 minutes should be enough to consider the main issues. I'm happy to say that I'm not limbering up for something similar, although I do accept it's entirely possible that 45 minutes of Deputy Tadyer would be more entertaining than 10 minutes of me. So I first encountered Pillar 2, or Pillar 2 Globe, as I think it's properly known, when I was in government, and ministers were briefed on the preferred approach that had been developed by officers and ministers. It was immediately apparent that whilst the concept at stake was relatively simple, a global minimum tax rate for large multinational enterprises, the details of implementing the policy were exceptionally complex. You can tell this partly because of the proliferation of acronyms. Globe, MSIT, IIR, UTPR, QRTC, GILTI, and so on. So this is a piece of legislation that is exceptionally complex in its execution, although it is simple in its intent. I must say that even renewed and intensive exposure to Jersey's approach to adopting Pillar 2 over the last few months, as reviewing the panel and reviewing the work, has not made the task of understanding it any easier. And I hope it's okay to admit that there are still details of the legislation about which I would not like to be too closely questioned. However, in better news, I think there are some simple conclusions that can be drawn, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on in this speech. Speaking principally with my scrutiny hat on before making a few personal observations at the end. This first proposition is about one particular aspect of Pillar 2, but there is a wider context which I'm going to briefly explore. And one way of understanding the government's approach, I think, is, as encapsulated in these propositions, is the result of a number of key decisions. And understanding those key decisions helps us understand the government's approach and allows us to judge whether it's going in the right direction. Of course, as we've heard, the origins of Pillar 2 lie in the increasing pressure from campaigners and many nations regarding base erosion and profit shifting, as we've heard very eloquently from Deputy Adjournment. This leads to what is often called a competitive race to the bottom, in which jurisdictions lower their tax rates in order to keep or attract companies, which can be particularly damaging for developing countries, which are unable to capture the tax revenue that should be due to them for the operation of multinationals in their territory. And that's why the OECD eventually came up with this system of a global minimum tax rate of 15% payable by companies with revenues over 750 million euros. And given that large companies in Jersey are mostly either zero-rated or pay 10%, clearly this means an increase in the headline tax rate for those companies that are in scope. It is worth remembering that there may be some non-finance companies, retailers or others, that are currently taxed at 20% and fall within this new tax. It's worth just remembering that. Tax confidentiality means that we don't know that for sure. So the first key decision Jersey faced was in or out. It is not compulsory to sign up to Pillar 2. And there are some in Jersey who argued to the panel that we should not. However, there would be significant implications. Reputationally, Jersey would risk being seen as effectively going rogue, particularly given that the EU, the UK, and other CDs are all signing up. Excuse me. However, the killer argument is a bit simpler and starker, which was pointed out by the Minister. If Jersey were to opt out, then the tax revenue that would have been paid here can be claimed by another jurisdiction. That is what is clever and innovative about the OECD's Pillar 2 regime. It is designed in such a way that companies have to pay the 15% minimum rate somewhere. If Jersey didn't sign up, then another jurisdiction where a Jersey-based entity also operates would be able to claim the tax that would have been due here. In other words, not signing up would have been a double whammy. We would have suffered reputationally and lost out on a big slug of tax income. So the first big decision point seems clear. We need to be in. And allied with that was the decision to introduce it in 25. We could have introduced it in 24, in theory at least. But again, I think we feel that the government's approach was correct. It would have meant going too early before we properly understood how other jurisdictions were implementing, and also the more advanced OECD guidance that has come out in the intervening period. And the next big decision was how to implement the 15% rate. And there were essentially two options, either a top-up tax on the existing 010 or an entirely new tax rate, new tax. And I think the problem with adapting 010 was complexity. It would have meant trying to calculate tax revenues on the basis of two different tax bases, because the tax base calculation for 010 is different to the tax base calculation under the OECD. So it was determined early on that the best way to implement Pillar 2 was for Jersey to create a new 15% tax rate, the MSIT as it's called. And this was significant because it enabled the Jersey to design its own tax under the OECD's so-called common approach. And so again, the panel took the view that using the bespoke tax route rather than adapting existing taxes was the right approach. So this common approach has been critical to the government's way of dealing with this, because the OECD offers two routes to compliance with Pillar 2. There's an off-the-shelf route, where you just basically lift and drop their suggested tax into your own tax system. And for many countries, this makes sense. If their corporate tax rates are already over 15%, then Pillar 2 is not going to have much bite anyway. And so using the OECD's model rules is a quick and easy way to ensure compliance. However, the OECD also endorsed an alternative way to achieve compliance, the common approach. This was effectively meant that jurisdictions had to sign up to the principles, the objectives of Pillar 2, but they could choose to do it in their own way. So Jersey's use of the common approach was therefore another key decision. And it made sense to the panel, given the specific nature of our finance industry and indeed our economic model. It allows the detailed implementation of Pillar 2 to be tailored to the island's needs. Using the common approach makes it critical, of course, to stay in touch with the OECD to ensure that the island's legislation remains compliant. In this regard, the panel was pleased to note that officers and ministers had remained deeply engaged with the OECD officials to ensure that there should be no problems with compliance further down the road. And I'd like to join in the comments made earlier by Deputy Joseph in complimenting the officers involved. We were very, very impressed with the level of engagement with the officers over a sustained period, and their command and engagement with people outside the island, the OECD and other nations. So the ability to design the tax from scratch using the common approach was important because it allowed the government to tailor the legislation so it would fit around the particular contours of Jersey's finance industry. And in particular, it meant that a system of tax credits could be devised for US companies that operate in Jersey. This is important because the US already has its own version of a minimum corporate tax, which goes by the rather exquisite acronym of GILTI. Since the US minimum tax rate is 21%, adding the OECD's Pillar 2 15% rate on top would be disadvantageous to American corporations. And therefore, under the MSIT, the US-based companies will be able to claim a tax credit of up to 50% of their Jersey tax liability if they can show that they have already paid tax in the USA. And the aim of this is to ensure that we maintain business, American business, in the island. And the panel agreed that the tax credit option was a smart use of the flexibility that is offered by the common approach. We did also note that whilst the government has designed the tax credits as a defensive move to try and keep US companies in Jersey, if it is successful, there is a possibility that over time it might tempt other companies to locate here. In other words, it might be seen as offering a competitive advantage. I know the government is keen to emphasise that this is not the intention, but it seems to the panel that it is a logical extrapolation that a successful defensive measure could over time be sufficiently successful to attract new business. The panel's view was that the government needed to remain alert to how Jersey's approach is being perceived by the outside world. We have no doubt that Jersey's approach is fully compliant with the OECD, but that might not stop political opponents from trying to make capital. So those are the big decisions that I wanted to highlight: choosing to go in, choosing when to go in, choosing to have a bespoke tax, the MSIT, and to use the flexibility inherent in the common approach to ensure that Jersey's Pillar 2 tax works for the Jersey's finance industry and the wider economy. In terms of how the money is spent, we endorsed the view that adding it to reserves was important, and I will say a few more words about that in my personal comments in a moment. We did also agree that the approach to try and spend some of the money on measures to improve the competitiveness of the industry was important, but would need to be handled very carefully to not fall foul of the OECD. I want to thank, in addition to officers who worked on the panel, who worked incredibly hard against very, very tight deadlines and did terrific work. I'm sure you've all read the report that they produced. Don't see anyone nodding. The government did, at least. But I also want to make a thanks that I forgot to put in my introduction to the report, which was to those business representatives who came forward to talk to the panel in confidence. It was very helpful to the panel to have the benefit of those words. So finally, a few personal thoughts. I mentioned the tax receipts, as did Deputy Joseph, and I find myself aligning fairly strongly with him. It is going to be a big responsibility to decide how those tax revenues are spent. The Stabilisation Fund is one I feel particularly strongly about. I went to the presentation made by the Fiscal Policy Panel a few weeks ago, and they made the point that the Stabilisation Fund is there because we don't control interest rates in Jersey. Therefore, we cannot use interest rates to operate countercyclically when a depression bites or when the economy gets overheats. So the clever thing that was done by people long before me was to create the Stabilisation Fund as a countercyclical measure, a way of dealing with recession should it happen. And that was wise. And it's been used. It was used, I believe, after the financial crash in 2008, and it was used, of course, most recently during COVID. And it has not been topped up since. There are plans to try and do so, but we have yet to see them come to fruition. So it does seem to me that the Stabilisation Fund should be a priority. The Fiscal Policy Panel basically chastised the government, previous government and this government, for not topping up the Stabilisation Fund during a time of buoyant tax revenues. But they basically said, folks, you've got a second chance. From pure good luck, really, you've got a second chance through the Pillar 2 revenues. Don't mess it up this time. So I do feel that feels like a very strong message that we should heed. Of course, there is always demand for spending priorities in the day, but we need to have a strategic approach as well. One other thing I think that struck me was that we will no longer be able to compete, as Deputy Joseph said, by offering zero or low tax rates in the international marketplace. But I think what has been impressive about the way the government has approached this is they have found the room to still be competitive, to still find ways of making our industry competitive by designing the tax carefully in a way that means it offers things that other jurisdictions are not offering at the moment. Of course, they could catch up, if you like. And it seems to me that that's important to sort of remember that to those people who've said that this could be the death knell of the finance industry in Jersey. We do still have the ability, controlling our own economy, controlling our own taxes, to design taxes, international taxes like this, in a way that is helpful to our own economy. And I think one of the advantages of the people working in this area in government is that they are able to see that picture, and it is good for the island. And there is no doubt that Pillar 2 is a big moment in Jersey's history. Whilst notionally we still have the ability to set our own tax rates for large companies, in practice they've been set for us by the international community, working through the OECD. Pillar 2 is the beginning of international taxation, and I think it is unlikely to be the end. Already there are discussions taking place, as Deputy Adjournment said, regarding minimum tax rates for very high net worth individuals. The international landscape is going to become increasingly complex, and Jersey will have to stay fully engaged. In my view, we should continue to engage positively with that international tax reform. My final point, I suppose, is that there are two things to balance here. The finance industry is very, very important to this island, and we need to think carefully about how we support it, how we make sure that we treat it in a way that means that the industry stays. But we also have to think about the stability of the global system. We have a stake in a multilateral world where where agreements are negotiated, where rules are abided by, and I therefore feel that it is not in Jersey's interests to resist too strongly a direction of travel when it is becoming obvious where that direction of travel is going. And I think we should listen to the international community, see where it's going, and have some due regard to that, because in the end, we may need to take decisions that may appear to be in the short term, not in the short-term interests of a sector of the finance community, but they may be in the long-term interests of the stability of the system. And I think we need to bear that in mind as well. I shall finish there, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So I too support this draft law for all the reasons given by Deputy Renouf. There is no choice, actually. It would be utterly ridiculous for the Assembly to decline to pass the law. If I have a concern, I think it is that the law demonstrates the extent to which we are now, as a jurisdiction, bowled along by international initiatives over which we have virtually no control. The consequence of the adoption of this law will be that entities which have a revenue of more than 750 million euros will pay tax at the rate of 15%. Entities which have an income of 700 million euros will pay 0%. But that is the consequence of the system that we have. I don't rail against it, I just observe that it is curious. I have a question for the Minister. We should, it seems to me, so far as we can, retain a control over our own destiny in fiscal matters. And I'd like to ask him whether the OECD model rules have an ambulatory character so far as Jersey is concerned. In other words, if the terms defined in the rules are changed by the OECD and take on a different meaning, does that different meaning automatically apply under Jersey law? The second observation that I would make, which it struck me as being curious, was the interrelationship between Articles 29 and 30 of the bill. Article 29, headed Offences, says that it is an offence for a reporting entity in relation to a chargeable MNE group to fail without reasonable excuse to comply with a requirement imposed by Article 22, and that requirement is to submit a return. And then one goes down to Article 31, actually, and one sees that the failure to submit an MCIT return can also give rise to a civil penalty imposed by the controller. I'd be curious to know in what circumstances a failure to comply with this requirement would lead to a prosecution and an appearance before the Royal Court, and in what circumstances it would lead to a civil penalty imposed by the controller. But as the Minister has said, the passing of this bill, this draft law, is clearly in the interests of the island, and I support it.
Very much. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the Assistant Treasury Minister has explained clearly the objectives of the Pillar 2 package of legislation, which I lodged on the 14th of August. I support everything Deputy Gorst has said and just want to pick up on three particular areas, which are Jersey's tax policy principles, our forecast Pillar 2 revenues, and Revenue Jersey's ongoing role in supporting taxpayers. Members will remember the tax policy principles that have been approved by this Assembly and are contained once again in the proposed budget for 2025 to 2028 at page 22, in case anyone wishes to consult. Firstly, they should be fair and sustainable, which means that taxation must be necessary, justifiable and sustainable. Taxes should be low, broad, simple and fair, which means that everyone should make an appropriate contribution to the costs of providing services, while those on the lowest incomes should be protected. And lastly, that they should support broader government policy, so they should be internationally competitive. Taxation should support economic, environmental and social policy. It should be efficient and effective, and taxes should be easy to implement, administer and comply with at a reasonable cost. No individual tax measure will meet all of these principles, but overall, the island's tax regime should represent a sustainable balance of them. I believe the Pillar 2 legislation being debated today meets most, if not all, of these principles, both in its design and in the plans for its implementation. The proposed budget 2025 sets out the government's basis for forecasting Pillar 2 tax receipts for Jersey. Forecasting the revenue effect of any tax change is challenging. It can be impacted by ongoing changes to the regime, the way the regime is implemented, and the behaviour of taxpayers in response. In the case of Pillar 2, forecasting is made more difficult as the responses of in-scope taxpayers will be affected by the implementation of Pillar 2 globally and not just implementation in Jersey. The international implementation of Pillar 2 is still in its inception phase, and the pace and manner of its rollout varies across jurisdiction in line with the OECD common approach. It's likely that the behavioural effects will take some years to fully materialise. These variables have informed the government's approach to the Pillar 2 forecast, which has been prepared as a base case forecast amounting to £52 million in 2026 and 2027, rising to £54 million in 2028. This base case represents the tax revenues that the government is reasonably confident will be received on a recurring basis. It may be that Pillar 2 revenues turn out to be considerably higher than this base case. However, the magnitude of these additional or upside revenues is highly uncertain. There is also further uncertainty as to whether any upside tax revenues may continue in the medium term. For example, they could be impacted by future changes in the behaviour of some in-scope multinational groups. Because of these considerable uncertainties, the decision has been taken not to try and estimate the upside tax revenues in this budget. This approach has been endorsed by the Fiscal Policy Panel in its recent annual report. As with all tax revenue forecasts, the Pillar 2 tax forecast will be kept under review. The government plan also sets out the government's approach to the use of the base case Pillar 2 receipts and to any further upside receipts. Base case receipts will be used to fund the servicing of hospital borrowing, that is interest and funding costs, investment in the competitiveness of the island, the cost of implementing and administering Pillar 2, and strengthening reserves, including consideration of transfers to the Stabilisation Fund or the Strategic Reserve in line with Fiscal Policy Panel recommendations. It's anticipated that the potential upside revenues from Pillar 2 should be used for strengthening reserves, further investment in competitiveness and investment in infrastructure. I can only endorse Deputy Joseph's comments and those of Deputy Reniff regarding the prudence with which we should use those funds going forward and the importance that we do place on building those reserves further. We all, you will hear me say this more than once, we all have our part to play in that process. I also endorse the comments of Deputy Gorst in relation to the importance of supporting in-scope Pillar 2 groups as we and other jurisdictions implement Pillar 2. This government plan, or budget, allocates over £4 million towards the estimated implementation costs in 2025 and 2026. And as noted in the resourcing requirements in P53 and P54, there will be further funding requirements in later years as the Revenue Jersey staffing and ongoing IT costs become clearer. These costs are an important investment in the support that Revenue Jersey is committed to providing to the impacted taxpayers. I'm assured that work is advancing well on the design of the new Pillar 2 IT system and a user-friendly IT portal, the establishment of a new dedicated Pillar 2 unit within Revenue Jersey to provide one-to-one customer service, and Revenue Jersey guidance. In fact, frequently asked questions have already been posted on the Revenue Jersey website to deal with the most urgent issues for clarification. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Others have spoken on why it makes sense to support this proposition and why we should not take it for granted. There is a song by The Clash that coloured my teenage years, admittedly my later teenage years, and I think it has some relevance to the companies who could fall within this law's net and end up paying tax in this island. And that song was, should I stay or should I go? Now, we can regard this law as fortuitous, but no international company that falls within its net is pinned here, like some sort of moth on some exhibition cloth. We still have efforts to make this island competitive as a jurisdiction that we need to make. And investment in competitiveness is not and should not be regarded as a matter for the finance industry alone. Reducing red tape, keeping taxes low, being efficient and truly productive across the whole of the public sector, across the States Assembly itself, all play a role here towards making us more competitive as a jurisdiction in which companies would want to operate here and choose to stay here. The common strategic policy touches on some of these other areas in which that play an important part in our being competitive as a jurisdiction, and this includes the quality and availability of education and childcare. But I think the bottom line that I want to make is that as we support this proposition, as I hope we all do, that we really think about the collaborative nature that we need to continue between us to ensure that this isn't a buck in a trend, that we really can reverse a trend that has actually led to a declining productivity, a declining economy, and focus on the things that really matter, which is really integral to our well-being, and that is our economy. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Tadier.
Sir, like others, I'd like to also just acknowledge a lot of work has gone into this. I know from sitting on the panel, first of all, that a great deal of work from the Minister's side with a very committed and diligent team that he's got has been working, not just recently, but for I think, probably years on this change that has come through. And also I've seen that our scrutiny panel, for example, has put a lot of work in, not least the officers involved, to turn something around in a relatively short space of time for what is a big piece of work. So the scrutiny has been going on, and I know that, of course, it will have been scrutinised by interested parties who have been watching. So if you like, there's at least 3 forms of scrutiny that have been happening with this legislation. And of course, that will need to continue because I think, as has been suggested, nobody knows 100% what all of the consequences of this will be and how it will bed in. But we do note that it is potentially something that's very exciting, at least those of us who have probably followed international taxation for a while, recognise that there is a continuum here. And I noticed that Deputy Schoen and also the proposer, Deputy Renouf, did touch not just on the nuts and bolts of how this will affect us, but also the underlying philosophy about why this is being done. And I think that's important to remember that. We put it in our report. If I can bring it a bit closer to home, though, because I do want to touch on this issue. I wasn't necessarily going to, but it was raised by a few people, including a few members, including Deputy Joseph, about this windfall that we're going to get. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves of maybe part of the history of this. And I went back to what is a rather stark-looking document now from October 2007. It's not quite as colourful and glossy as maybe the documents that government produces nowadays. And it was the budget statement lodged in October 2007 and debated in December. And back then, it's worth noting that the overall government expenditure was something in the region of £570 million. That's 16 years ago, and we're now at a point where government expenditure is double that, probably slightly more than double. I don't make any comments on that, but it does reflect the way that government spending has gone and where inflation's gone. And I also, using the Control F function, which I think we're all familiar with, on documents, type in the word black hole. And we're reminded that it was also a couple of years before this that GST was introduced into Jersey. And at the time, GST was introduced on the basis of changes to our corporate tax regime, where some companies which previously did pay tax were no longer to pay tax. And that at the time, it was a £45 million hole that GST was sought to fill. And it was introduced to fill that at 3%. Which is now at 5%, which I think many of us would never have thought it would have stayed at 5%. But we won't go into a full debate about GST, so I use that partly to illustrate the point I'm about to make. There are probably only, I think, 2 members in this assembly today physically who were present at that time, and it would be Deputy Southern on the one hand and Deputy Gorst on the other. And apologies if I've missed anyone. There are other members who are maybe not here today who would have been there for that debate. For the budget debate in 2007, I'm talking about. So, both there, yeah. Young deputies, and I'm sure you still are in many ways. And So when we talk about this windfall that's being made here, actually another way to look at it is that it's a deferred taxation that we haven't been getting for 16 years, which at the time the public were asked to pay for in the form of an indirect tax, which was not related to their ability to pay or their income, but it was actually related to a sum that government needed to fill because companies were no longer being taxed. So fast forward, and that £45 million today of GST, if indeed that's what it actually was at the time, is now roughly, going on last year's figures, about £115 million in GST that people have been paying to make up for the fact that companies haven't been paying tax in Jersey. Okay? So when we talk about this windfall and what we might do with the windfall and that we should maybe put it into a particular reserve, that's fine, we can have that debate, but it's not for today's not when we have that debate. And I would also say it's absolutely right that that decision about where the money goes is controversial, because ultimately the public were asked to pay in the first place for that deferred payment, which they've been making for the last 16 years into what would have been corporate income tax. So if we are going to ask for that money to be put in a pocket of in a bank account that we use called the consolidated fund, then or whatever fund we end up using for it, which has its merits, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that some people will say, well, actually, can you maybe give us our GST money back? Could you reduce GST to 2.5% rather than 5%? Now, I think that's not going to happen, of course, but if it were logical and fair, it might be the consequence that we followed through on that. So I do think we find ourselves in a very interesting position, though, here, that we are recouping some of that money, but it's only some of those companies which will be paying tax. That's what we've got to remind ourselves. The multinational corporate income tax will be for the largest companies, and it will be for the multinational companies. And the question in future will inevitably come about, and it usually comes about via external pressure, not necessarily from internal pressure, about do we then have a conversation about how we might tax other companies that are benefiting from being in Jersey, and if so, how do we do that, and what are the implications of doing it? The last thing I would say on this bit is that actually we hear a lot of talk about competitiveness, but we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of these terms are relative. So when we say we want to make Jersey more competitive, or the competitiveness of the island will be invested in, the competitiveness of whom and for whom? Is it for businesses pure and simple, or is it actually the competitiveness for people who might actually have to live here, work here, and afford their housing costs, their electricity costs, etc.? And so I think there will be arguments necessarily about who benefits from the new windfall that comes in from this deferred taxation, if I can call it that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak on the principles, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to follow Deputy Tadia because he views the world through slightly different lenses to the ones that I view it through. One day we might actually exchange glasses, so I'm not sure. I want to just start with Deputy Yosef's speech, which really is the counterbalance to what Deputy Tadia has just spoken to us about. We know that financial services is the bedrock of our economy, and yet there is an important symbiotic relationship between the other sectors of the economy as well. Hospitality, connectivity, making Jersey a great place to live and work, the historic industries of agriculture, and I'd just like to offer a word of apology to colleagues in the gallery having to sit through this tax debate when you're really here for a different debate, but the fishing industry as well. They all work together to make Jersey what it is. And I, for one, am absolutely committed, counter to a number of other interventions in this debate, in wishing to maintain and preserve Jersey as a tax-neutral platform for investment flows around the globe. And I would slightly counter some things that colleagues have said. In Jersey, we expect tax to be paid on capital before it reaches Jersey, and we expect tax to be paid on capital when it's invested in other countries. This is something that we as an assembly and as a community cannot and should not take for granted. As deputies have said, these large multinational corporations are not in Jersey by accident. They're in Jersey through choice. Jersey, as a financial services centre, is a jurisdiction of choice. And what we do in this assembly can have a direct implication on the choices that not only those large multinational companies make, but also small companies, families who are creating trusts, businesses which are seeking to raise finance, individuals that are wanting to consolidate investments to invest elsewhere across the globe. Jersey is a jurisdiction of choice, and we shouldn't forget that. And the rationale for that choice is multifaceted. Deputy Joseph spoke about some of those. The quality of our judiciary and the lawyers that support that institution over the way. The stability and the soundness of public finances, which means ensuring that we have got appropriate reserves in place, and the FPP have spoken a lot about their thoughts about the size of our reserves, and so we are right to be challenged that they need enhancing and increasing, not using in any other way. And political stability is important. The connection to the city, but also the time zone, which allows us on in an everyday working situation to be connected both east and west of here. All of these factors are important, as is compliance with relevant international standards, whether they be the FATF standards or appropriate tax standards. And therefore it is important, as Deputy Balash reminded us, it is important to be connected with international fora in the way that we are. And our challenge is not to step back from those forums, but to increase our contact with them and our ability to attend and influence those decisions. And when it comes to the OECD and the work of the inclusive framework, I am incredibly proud of the officials that we send in Jersey. Firstly, we attract them to Jersey. And secondly, we send them out doing unsung, difficult technical work on our behalf, ensuring that the international community, not always agreeing with us, but has a better understanding of what it is that we do in Jersey in our finance centre. And we should never, ever, for a day or a minute, take it for granted. And I don't believe that we do. And I hope that we won't in the future. Deputy Jern spoke to us about the developing world and sometimes the difficulty that they have encountered with inward investment, the need for inward investment, but not always necessarily having the skills in their competent authority to ensure that they're getting the best out of that investment, how they're taxing it, what offsets they're giving, rather than just having the investment and the jobs in country. And it is true that the way that the Pillar 2 model rules are set out means that some of those issues can be tackled. But it will require, and it does require, those countries to implement themselves domestic minimum taxes to ensure that they take the share in this new world of profits that are made in country and that they are able to tax them appropriately because it is a global approach. And that is something that the OECD is mindful that it needs to continue working on and encouraging. And I hope that indeed that is exactly what happens. Others have said that they think that this is in effect, a train that's left the station and is going in all sorts of other places. They've talked about the wealth tax and all of those things. I am much more cautious in that regard. The reason being is that these are companies which are operating multi-jurisdictionally, and it's not about personal or family wealth. And I think that the sovereign nature of the right to tax for sovereigns and in our case where you have the autonomy to do so is a very much more difficult set of problems to solve. So I don't think that we're perhaps on the journey that some have indicated they think we might be. So I find myself in one of those strange situations that had someone asked me the question that Deputy Balash asked me, I'd probably say go and speak to Deputy Balash. He will probably know the answer to it. But firstly, I wanted to touch on his important point about ambulatory rules. One of the reasons that we have decided to separate out the two pieces of legislation and do a Jersey MSIT rather than just following the QDMTT, which is the approach that we could have done to deliver the model rules, but we've chosen a Jersey law, is because it does just that. It enhances our own domestic competency and right to write our own domestic tax legislation. And therefore, in the MSIT, there aren't ambulatory provisions for the very reasons that I think he's indicated he would be concerned about. Of course, we will have to continue to follow the model rules if they get changed, but that will be a decision for this Assembly in how it follows those model rules and when it follows those model rules. So we'll give certainty we'll be following the model rules, but it's right that this Assembly decides. In this legislation, of course, it's different. In the second bit of legislation that we will come to after this, in the IIR, because that is incorporating that top-up tax into Jersey domestic legislation, and there are ambulatory provisions for that there, and it's absolutely important in that regard that we follow the rules to the letter in the same way that the model rules do, because that piece of legislation, unlike the MSIC, will need to go off to the OECD for a peer review process. A domestic covered tax is a domestic covered tax. That's what the MSIT is. It's within the purview of this Assembly, and it will not therefore be subject to OECD peer review. But with regard to the IIR, we separated it out so that that bit of legislation can have that peer review process and therefore must follow and have that ambulatory provision written within it. Deputy Balash also asked about in effect, the interplay between the civil penalties for failing a global information return and the criminal issue. So my understanding is this, but I've had a word with the Solicitor General, so I say what he said as well. My understanding is that there could be a criminal prosecution for a failure of a global information return, i.e. failure to file, but that could only lead to a monetary fine. But as the Solicitor General said, it will be for the Attorney General to consider and in due course issue guidance in that regard. So I hope that answers the questions for the principle of this legislation, and I maintain the principles and call for the appel, sir.
Appel is called for. I invite members not in the Assembly to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P54, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 41 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. How do you propose the matter in second reading, Minister? There's an amendment, isn't there?
So I'd like to propose it as amended, if I may.
Do members agree that this can be proposed as amended in second reading? Very well. So how do you propose the articles?
Yes, thank you, sir. I will be, if members are agreeable, proposing it en bloc, as I say, as amended. Parts 1 and 2 of the law set out the introductory provisions, definitions, and the application of the law to chargeable multinational groups. Part 3 details the substantive provisions of the law dealing with the charging provisions of the multinational corporation income tax, including the charged tax, the computations as calculated in accordance with the model rules, the creditable tax, the payment and instalment obligations, as well as provisions relating to the relief of losses. Parts 4 to 6 deal with the administrative provision of the law which relate to registrations, returns, offences, penalties and appeals. Part 7 signposts the power to make provision for qualified refundable tax credits. And Part 8 outlines the citation and commencement date for the law being the 1st of January. And of course, I remind members that there will need to be, should we approve this, an act operatoire bringing it into immediate effect.
Look, obviously you propose the schedules as well.
Indeed, I do, sir. Sorry, yes.
Are the articles and schedules seconded for second reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? No member wishes to speak. All those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show. Those against? It's adopted on second reading. Do you move in third reading, Minister?
Indeed, I do, sir, in the same way. It is, of course, customary to offer words of thanks at some point. I'm proposing to do that in the third reading of the next piece of legislation, but I maintain these articles in third reading now.
Are they seconded for third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I wonder whether in the third reading the Minister would give the Assembly his view about the next steps that will be inevitably taken, these global initiatives, in now having passed this global initiative. It starts, it is said, at a certain level, and then inevitably then in the period of time as these things bed in, can he, and is it appropriate to ask him when he thinks that these global rules about taxation, of which I do not align my views with those of the remarks issued by Deputy Tadier, we are a jurisdiction that simply is fortunate enough to have a...
Well, Deputy...
I won't go on about that, but anyway,
no,
but when are these things going to carry on?
It's not that. I hesitate to interrupt you, but standing orders require that in third reading the only debate is about whether or not the law is adopted as amended. There is no discussion about any other part.
Okay, so my comments are not relevant. Okay.
Does any other member wish to speak? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I won't respond to that interjection at this point, but should the Deputy wish to raise the point as we go into the next piece of legislation, I would be pleased to respond appropriately. But in the meantime, sir, I call for the appel, please.
That is called for. Any members who have left the Assembly, would they please return in order to vote? I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law has been adopted in third reading, 38 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Following the approval of this item, then, the Minister for Treasury and Resources, as he's already indicated, will propose a draft act declaring that the draft law that has just been adopted will have immediate effect, an act operatoire, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Act declaring that the Multinational Corporate Income Tax Jersey Law 2000 has immediate effect. The states make this act under Article 12 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019.
Minister.
So I move the act, as you have just correctly reminded us. It has the effect of bringing this piece of legislation into force so that they have effect for accounting periods beginning on or after the 1st of January 2025.
Is the act operatoire seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak? Those in favour of adopting Deputy Curtis, Alex Curtis? You were calling for the appel. The appel is called for. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. It's on the act operatoire to bring the law into immediate effect. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The act operatoire has been adopted. 38 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item of public business is the draft Multinational Taxation Global Anti-Base Erosion IIR tax law P53, lodged by the same minister. The main respondent is Deputy Renouf, again, of the subcommittee, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Multinational Taxation Global Anti-Base Erosion IIR Tax Jersey Law 2000, a law to implement the model rules published by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development as tax challenges arising from the digitalisation of the economy, Global Anti-Base Erosion Model Rules, Pillar 2, Inclusive Framework on BEPS. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful to the Assembly for unanimously approving the new Multinational Corporate Income Tax Jersey law, which is the first part of giving effect to Pillar Group Globe package. The second tax is the one before us now and is the income inclusion rule. It is a top-up tax that generally applies at the level of the in-scope group's parent company. If the parent jurisdiction has not implemented the IIR, then its application falls to the next intermediate parent in the group structure where the IIR applies. The IIR legislation is separate from the MSIC because it is a separate tax. However, as I've said, it's part of the Pillar 2 implementation package. The IIR plays an important role in the government's plans for implementing Pillar 2 as it switches off the application of the backstop under-taxed profit rule that would otherwise apply across multiple jurisdictions globally. Implementing an IRR in Jersey thus provides certainty to in-scope groups and has been welcomed by industry as part of our Pillar 2 implementation package, and therefore I propose the principles, sir.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Renouf?
Yes, sir, members, and indeed perhaps those in the gallery will be pleased to hear that I've much less to say about P53. And that's because I think I see this proposition as more technical in nature. It's about the how of implementing Pillar 2 and follows rather mechanistically from the decision to introduce Pillar 2 and to have the MSIT. And it also, of course, has to be tightly drawn in order to pass OECD peer review. I will, at this point, just put in an extra bit of thanks, which I forgot in my first speech, which is to say thanks to the ministers for their help with the scrutiny panel for agreeing to delay the debate until this sitting, which it was 3 weeks later than they originally wanted, and we appreciate the flexibility shown and indeed the support in terms of officer time that was given to the panel to help us in our deliberations. So as the Minister has said, essentially the income inclusion rule is the top-up mechanism by which multinational scopes are brought within scope of Pillar 2 in a jurisdiction. And in terms of its relevance and
I'm sorry, if you pause for a moment. The Chief Minister is kindly making a very substantial donation to the fines fund.
So he has.
I think you can carry on now, Deputy, without risk of too much more interruption. Please do.
So he has my immense sympathy after my own experience with that issue only recently. The key point here, sir, is that if we don't have an income inclusion rule, then the profits earned by corporations in Jersey will be paid elsewhere. So it seems to the panel and indeed to me that this is a logical and sensible way to proceed and follows fairly logically from the approach that the government has adopted generally, and we have no problems in supporting it as a panel.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak, and I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I don't think I need to respond. I just call for the appel, please.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats if they have their phones under control. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. The vote is on the principles. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 40 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Moving to second reading, Minister, you have an amendment to the proposition. Do you wish the proposition to be taken as amended?
If I may, sir, please.
Do members agree the proposition may be taken as amended? Second reading. Very well. How do you wish to propose in second reading then, Minister?
Sorry, sir. I'll propose them en bloc, if I may. Part 1 and Part 2 of the law set out the introductory provisions relating to the interpretation of the law and the implementation of the model rules. Part 3 details permissible modifications and additions to certain provisions of the model rules for the purposes of their application in Jersey. Part 4 deals with the IIR tax, including the meaning of qualifying entity. The group required to determine the amounts in relation to the income loss of entities in the group and provisions relating to the share of the top-up tax allocated to the qualifying entity, who is required to pay the IIR top-up tax in accordance with the model rules. And Part 5 to 7 deal with the administrative provisions of the law. Part 8 outlines the citation again and the commencement date, and Schedule 1 and 2.
The various articles are seconded in second reading? Yes. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? Those in favour of adopting in second reading, kindly show. Those against? The articles are adopted in second reading. Do you move in third reading?
Indeed I do, sir, and I must say in third reading I'm extremely grateful to all of those members who have complimented officials across the various government departments that have been working on these proposals, attending meetings in Paris. It sounds glamorous, but it really isn't. So, attending meetings in Paris, attending meetings virtually, and all of the engagement and written requirements to get us to where we are today. So I'm sometimes astounded by the quality of individuals who seek to serve the public of this island and in the way that they do so. And the two pieces of legislation before us today confirm to me their utter and complete dedication to the public of this island, and they do it quietly, they do it behind the scenes, they don't make a fuss about it, they're rarely thanked, but we in this assembly, I know that we as a ministerial team, we in this assembly and the wider community owe them a debt of gratitude. Some are here for long periods of time, others will inevitably move on to pastures new. But I am personally very, very grateful for all of the work that they've done on our behalf, and I congratulate them. And sir, I propose the articles in third reading.
Is it seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So in completely agreeing with the Minister's comments about the quality of the advice that ministers have had over a long period of time, I think he's absolutely right, and the Assembly's foot stamping will be really well appreciated, I know, by those individuals. But also, I would wish to say that there is an incredible amount of individuals, both within the legal services industry, our other professional bodies, that actually work for these entities and provides the services to them. And I hope that the message is going to be sent out from this Assembly today, loud and clear, that the government, the members of this Assembly, are grateful for their efforts in securing this type of business in Jersey. Moreover, and more importantly, that we will do everything we can to keep hold of this business. We will not compromise on those principles that we spoke about in the early part of the first debate. Moreover, we will seek to strive to get more business. We cannot differentiate ourselves on tax because this is a global standard, but we can differentiate ourselves on other of those attributes. I'm sure we can't make your courts any better, sir, but what we can do is we can get our services and our responsiveness and our regulatory and the other important aspects that create the ecosystem for these businesses to want to operate. The message is clear: tax is no longer a differentiator for these kinds of businesses. So therefore, we have to basically even more focus on being a best-in-class, most responsive, most excellent in all other areas to attract this type of business, which is of direct and significant benefit to the Exchequer of Jersey. And I hope those comments are appropriate in the third reading in welcoming them and saying that they should be adopted and then used to a maximum extent to more businesses, because as we're hearing from the Labour Party in the UK, it is economic growth that matters, and growing the cake and growing the economy of Jersey matters for this Assembly's ability to provide the capital and the annual revenue expenditure from which it wishes to spend. We cannot spend the money if we don't have it, and this is a very welcome, albeit unexpected, and without some risk, there are some risks associated with it, but if we keep going as we've done in the last few years, much to the chagrin of some, we will continue to benefit our community, and this Assembly will have some slightly less troublesome problems dealing with it, balancing the books, and we might actually get a hospital built, but we can't spend it.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? No other member wishes to speak in third reading? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
So, thank you. I'm not sure that was, I always get confused about what I should and shouldn't say in third reading, so you thought I'd know by now. But I do want to reiterate the words that Deputy Joseph has said. Individuals, day in and day out, create a successful finance industry in Jersey. As we say, we should never take it for granted. We are a jurisdiction of choice. There are a number of individuals who have supported our officials across government departments in thinking, in talking to their clients, in understanding the nuances. All of that work, so they've done pro bono when they generally are charging hundreds, if not thousands of pounds an hour. They've done it all for in Jersey's best interests, and I'm very grateful to them as well. So as the wider industry does, they have my full support. I know they have the Deputy's full support. I believe they have the support of the government, and I know that they have the support of the Assembly as well. On days like today, we can show that support. What is important, however, is that in lots of other decisions, we show that support as well as we make our decisions in this place. So I maintain the articles in third reading, and I call for the appel.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. And if members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in third reading, 39 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. As for the last law, following on from that, is an acte operatoire, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Act declaring that the Multinational Taxation Global Anti-Base Erosion IIR Tax Jersey Law 2000 has immediate effect. The States make this Act under Article 12 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I move the Act, which has the effect of bringing these articles into force so that they have effect for accounting periods beginning on or after the 1st of January 2025. Perhaps I'll be a little bit cheeky, sir, and say I'm very grateful for the support to the finance industry that the Assembly has shown over the course of the last hour and a half, and I hope that in the next hour and a half they show the same support for the fishing industry sitting in the gallery. Thank you, sir.
Is the Act seconded? Does any member wish to speak? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure whether this is a question for the Minister or a question indeed for the Solicitor General, but it's just for really the benefit of my understanding, and I apologise if my inexperience shows, but the text of the law says that it has immediate effect as if the draft had been confirmed by His Majesty in Council and registered in the Royal Court on the date of the making of this Act. Could the Minister advise the Assembly, what is different about this law in that in usual circumstances, when we pass new laws in the Assembly, they go up to the Privy Council for approval? Thank you, sir.
If it assists, I can probably, as the presiding officer, deal with that. The usual process for the passing of a law which is passed by the Assembly is that it then goes through a process of approval. It goes up into the United Kingdom where it's considered and put forward for approval by His Majesty in Council, and that takes a number of weeks. When one is dealing with a taxation draft, it would be potentially highly prejudicial to delay because the state simply couldn't raise tax, for example, at the end of a government plan or anything like that for the forthcoming year if it was pending royal consent, as a result of which a taxation draft, the Assembly has the ability to have an act bringing it into immediate effect, which means those taxes can be raised and the law can be carried out. It still goes through the royal assent process. It doesn't stop, but the actual law is effective as of now, if that assists.
I'm very grateful for that explanation. Thank you, sir.
Very well. Sorry, was there anything you wanted to add to that, Mr.
I wouldn't possibly presume so.
Yes, perhaps I should have left you to do that. Principle seconded. Does any other member wish to speak? No other member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate. And do you call for the appel?
Please, sir.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The Act operatoire has been adopted. 38 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. The next item of public business is the Marine Spatial Plan, P44, lodged by the Minister for the Environment. The main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition. However, there are two amendments, Minister, lodged by the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Panel. Are you accepting those amendments?
I'm accepting the second one, sir, but I'm aware that there's an amendment to that amendment, so I don't know what.
Well, I then
the
have
order
to
is.
ask the Environment. You aren't accepting the first amendment?
I'm not accepting the first amendment, I'm accepting the second, but I don't accept the amendment to the second amendment.
You don't accept the amendment,
No.
I think. Right. I think we have to deal with them all. Greffier? In which case, we will have to deal with them all separately as and when they arrive, because if you don't accept the amendment to the amendment, then you're not really accepting the amendment. If the panel is, it doesn't matter.
I'm grateful for your judgment.
No, I think we'll simply go as we are. Very well. Ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The stakes are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to agree the proposed Jersey Marine Spatial Plan as the roadmap to managing Jersey's marine environment, as set out in Appendix 1 to the report accompanying this proposition.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. And after such two hugely important debates on tax, it's nice to get some light relief with a debate as simple and straightforward as a marine spatial plan. But so I would say, I don't jest, because it's equally as important while the tax deals with the future economy of the island. Marine spatial plan deals with our territorial waters and how we use them into the future. So, sir, I will open this debate by saying how I feel this is a moment of change for Jersey. The bringing forward of our island's first marine spatial plan marks the moment we take responsibility for our seas beyond the short term. Through the MSP, we look to the future needs of our island community and the activities supported by our marine realm. This MSP sets out Jersey's strategy for the sea and marks the transition from the days of sea dragons and lead-line soundings to 3D seabed imaging and habitat modelling. By setting this strategy, we give a contextual framework for marine users, be they recreational, commercial or industrial. The MSP looks to balance culture, environmental, economic and social priorities while proposing significant modernisations in how we manage our marine space. This is the Assembly's opportunity to set a clear direction of travel for our seas. However, it does not bring any immediate change. As a non-statutory document containing priorities and not policies, each of its elements that are approved will need to be socialised, debated and delivered in line with the four key values of social, environmental, economic and cultural sustainability. This MSP, however, outlines a significant marine protected area network that will take us from 6% to over 20% based on best available data. Right at the start, I cannot stress enough that consultation has formed the cornerstone of this plan from its inception. We have worked tirelessly with the local community and all the key stakeholders who use, for whatever reason, our territorial waters to shape the Marine Spatial Plan. Before pen was even put to paper, the Marine Resources team held consultation sessions to understand the the marine priorities and issues for islanders and users of the island's waters. These, alongside a wealth of background documents and reports, were used to shape the initial plan over the spring and summer of last year. To support this, several further consultative meetings were conducted to gain a fuller understanding of the key issues and pressure points within the marine environment. So, sir, the draft MSP that followed the initial work was spread over 6 topic chapters dealing with everything from heritage, tourism and culture to fishing, infrastructure and shipping. These were taken for further consultation over last winter, a consultation that was extended to 14 weeks following the change in government that brought me back to this ministry. Again, engagement was high with 154 consultation responses covering 376 individual and different points. This in turn resulted in the refinement of the MSP, increasing the number of specific priorities to 91 and resulting in changes to key elements such as the Marine Protected Area Network, beach wardens and a visitor centre. The Priorities Action Plan document, as presented to the Assembly, covers the full suite of current marine priorities for the island and the people of Jersey. As well as the MPA areas that form a major focus, I would like to take members' attention for just a few moments to several other key areas of the plan. The plan takes into consideration the need to preserve and manage Jersey's historic and prehistoric coastline and marine features. These range from protected features such as Lacotte Neolithic site through to Victorian and occupational coastal structures. Looking below the waves, the island's extensive shipwrecks, including listed war graves, have also been recognised in the plan. Cultural practices such as low water fishing and rat collecting have also been highlighted in the MSP as important traditional activities. Ensuring their continued place in our culture and society has been recognised, along with the need to manage them sustainably. Alongside these traditional practices are a plethora of modern uses of our sea. The shores and coasts are all of vital cultural and social importance to islanders and visitors alike for exercise, recreation and well-being. From an act as simple as sitting on a beach taking in the view, to surfing, sailing, diving, kiteboarding, or just swimming in the sea, the value of these forms of recreation to both locals and visitors cannot be overstated when this is recognised throughout the plan. The challenge is that with the increasing popularity of water sports comes increased conflict between marine user groups for the space they desire. Sometimes this is between leisure activities directly. At other times it is between sport and commercial activities. The plan works to highlight these issues and identify the direction of work must take to ensure fair and proportional access for all users. While I've mentioned low water fishing as a practice of cultural importance, we all know that the range of fishing activity goes far beyond this. Managing the competition for space between fishing and other marine users and between commercial and recreational fishing has been highlighted as a key focus for the plan. For example, the use of gill nets and pot markers close to shore poses risks to swimmers and coastal anglers, both in terms of entanglement and loss of equipment. The MSP highlights the need to review and manage potential conflict between these user groups, recognising the rights and needs of all. Looking to our commercial fleet, the need to be able to fish today, tomorrow, next year and the next decade are recognised in the plan, as is the need for onshore facilities to support a sustainable fishing industry. Throughout the plan is the acknowledgement that all human activities are dependent on a healthy and functioning marine ecosystem. Recognition for the need to use and extract from our marine systems within sustainable limits is a key theme of the plan. Beyond this, the plan recognises the unseen ecosystem services provided by our seas. These range from oxygen exchange, and nutrient cycling to carbon storage and climate regulation. This is not just addressed through the MPA recommendations, but also through priorities for enhanced habitat and pollution management. As our island population grows and we continue to strive for carbon neutrality, the services the sea provides us will only become more important. The plan highlights the importance of coastal aquaculture to the industry and the island, and the increasing interest in farming new species and the possibility of offshore seaweed farming. The MSP also speaks to the need for sustainable management of the at-sea growing sectors and for regular review and policy development in line with this growing sector. Finally, as an island, we are heavily dependent on our connection to the continent and the UK for our supply of energy, our exchange of digital data, and our import and export of food and other goods. Ensuring these lifelines are fairly managed and protected within the diverse requirements being put upon our marine environment is vital to the stability of the island society and economy. The MSP works to review the current suite of infrastructure and transport links, as well as to consider future developments, including offshore energy production. These elements represent just the highlights of the Marine Spatial Plan, with many further detailed and nuanced points examined in balance. I hope members will appreciate the work that the MSP team have done and the contributions of the public in shaping what I believe to be a well-scoped and balanced plan for the island marine realm. Can I say at this point, sir, that I'm grateful to my colleagues in the scrutiny panel led by Deputy Jeune. Their extensive review has critiqued the MSP, and while there are, of course, some areas where we do not agree, I was pleased to see that overall they looked favourably on the MSP and the dedication and work that has gone into its creation. Sir, open sea and offshore reefs cover 95% of Jersey's territory and are fundamental to the island's identity, economy and connectivity. The coast and sea are used for both work and leisure, forming an ever-changing backdrop to islanders' lives. Below the surface is a hidden world of underwater habitats supporting a wealth of marine life and a rich archaeological legacy. Examples of the benefits provided by Jersey's marine environment include fish to eat, storage of carbon in plants and sediments, absorption of wave energy, cycling of water and pollution capture. The vitality of Jersey is therefore intrinsically linked to the health of our seas. However, despite its importance, Jersey's marine environment is under pressure from climate change and human activity. Marine spatial planning provides a means of managing Jersey's coasts and seas in a coordinated manner, which enables them to thrive and takes account of the many different ways in which they are used. It covers all parts of the marine environment: the seabed, the water column, the sea surface, and the air above. Many coastal nations have already prepared marine spatial plans or are in the process of doing so. So the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan brings Jersey into line with international best practice. The vision of our plan is for a thriving marine environment providing environmental, economic, cultural and social benefits. It was proposed in the 2022 Bridging Island Plan and has four key purposes: to provide a framework for organising human marine resources and activities in our waters, to develop a network of marine protected areas, to inform the policies of the next iteration of the Island Plan, and to support coordinated development and decision making on all aspects affecting the marine environment. The plan forms an overarching strategic framework setting the approach of a range of tools, including land use planning, marine resource management, and fishing regulation. The plan is not a statutory document, as I've said, but will give direction to other legislative and policy tools, which will be used to deliver the actions set out in the plan. Implementing the plan will involve different government departments and organisations working together. The plan will help Jersey to fulfil its international obligations, and this is important, sir. Obligations such as the 2022 Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which requires 30% of the marine environment to be protected by 2030. It will also contribute to efforts to address the climate and biodiversity crises. It will help to promote sustainable fishing practices, reduce conflicts between different users of the marine environment, and increase the resilience of services and infrastructure. The Government of Jersey Marine Resources team has worked in partnership with external specialist consultants and many local stakeholders to produce the plan. The result is a document which reflects the wide-ranging concerns and aspirations of Jersey residents with regard to the marine environment. The document also reflects, importantly, French views. They too have shared our territorial waters for centuries, and their input has been hugely important. Sir, everyone involved shares a desire to see Jersey seas thriving and delivering benefits for people and to nature. From sweeping sands to jagged rocks, and from busy harbours to empty wildernesses, Jersey's spectacular and diverse seascapes encompass many natural and human-made features. The Jersey Marine Spatial Plan contains priorities to absolutely maintain this huge diversity of seascapes in our territorial waters, and I commend it to the Assembly.
Is the proposition seconded? Very well. There are two amendments lodged by the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the first amendment.
1. After the words accompanying this proposition, insert the words, except that page 124 and figure 80 should be amended to include the area east of Les Ecriaux within the extension of the Marine Protected Area Network, as outlined in Action MB5A, with any consequential amendments to the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan made accordingly. 2. After the words accompanying this proposition, insert the words, except that page 124 and figure 80 should be amended to include the part of the basin between Les Ecriaux and Les Enquêtes within the extension of the Marine Protected Area Network, as outlined in Action MB5A, with any consequential amendments to the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan made accordingly. 3. After the words accompanying this proposition, insert the words, except that page 124 and figure 80 should be amended to include the areas to the east and west of Les Minky within the extension of the Marine Protected Area Network, as outlined in Action MB5A, with any consequential amendments to the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan made accordingly. 4. After the words accompanying this proposition, insert the words, except that page 124 should be amended to allow for the introduction of immediate protection of the southeastern edges of Les Ecriaux within the Marine Protected Area Network, rather than phased protection, with any consequential amendments to the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan made accordingly. And 5. After the words accompanying this proposition, insert the words, except that page 124 should be amended to allow for the introduction of immediate protection of the southeastern edges of Les Minky within the Marine Protected Area Network, rather than phased protection, with any consequential amendments to the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan made accordingly.
Deputy Jean.
Sir, before we start, could I ask a point of order?
Yes.
In the copies I'm using, I have the 5 amendments in alphabetical A, B, C, D, E, and the assistant greffier has read out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can we just be clear as to whether we're using numbers or letters?
Were they, the amendments, of course, when they're looking at the proposition as amended, they are in A, B, C, D and E, but the amendments as they're proposed within the amendment are 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So the answer is obviously 1 is A, 2 is B, etc. Is that all right, or do you wish
That's fine, sir. I just wanted to be clear and point that out to members before somebody gets confused.
I think probably in terms of the amendment, and if we're considering the amendments, we'll deal with them in the numbered form in the actual document itself. Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir, and thanks to the Minister for pointing that part out, because I would like to follow up with my email this morning to members that the panel will be taking each part separately in voting, and therefore as we speak, we would potentially, my speech is A to E, but I guess that it is also to 1 to 5.
I think we better deal with it as 1 to 5 because that's how it appears in the voting area of the paper rather than the amended proposition.
Okay, I'll try to do that on the hoof. Thank you, sir. One of the most striking features of the Environment, Housing, Infrastructure Panel's review into the Marine Spatial Plan was the dominance in discussions of the marine protected areas. It is a debate that centres on the balance to be struck between the protection of marine habitats, biodiversity and future fish stocks, and the current economic viability of elements of the Jersey's fishing industry. The submissions and some of the subsequent meetings and hearings held by the panel highlighted the complexity of the issue and the many conflicting voices on the development of these protected areas within the fishing industry. In the last 32 hours, members have also seen these conflicting voices being played out with the amount of correspondence that we have been receiving. In the final version of the Marine Spatial Plan before the Assembly, the Minister reduced the marine protected areas from 27% allocated in the original consultation draft to 23%. It is the view of the panel that the current Minister of the Environment made a political choice to find a short-term compromise which would push the final decision on the scope of the MPAs into undefined future. The panel is therefore asking state members to vote on keeping 4% of highly rich biodiverse marine space so it can be protected, not just as a nice to have, but because the areas are crucial to help support fish stocks into the future. It is not about percentages, but it is about the highly valued sensitive habitats in these areas. There is no doubt for the panel that the expansion of the MPAs will have a negative economic impact on parts of the fishing fleet. The impact on livelihoods and the future of the parts of the fleet is fully recognised by the panel. As it is also in the Marine Spatial Plan, when it states the proposed MPAs will require change in fishing patterns by some vessels. However, it should be noted that in comparison to static gear, mobile gear is the minority fishing activity within the proposed MPAs, and that it will remain permitted in 76.7% of Jersey's waters for all or part of the year. Even with the panel's amendments, dredging will still be allowed in roughly 73% of Jersey's waters. We also heard from a range of fishers during our review, and it became clear that there was not a homogenous voice in the fishing industry. It is clear that however the MPAs are designated, it will be important to introduce a support scheme and funds to those affected for a just transition. And we know that the Minister has already started putting this in place, from his successful proposition last year to increase support to farmers and fishers, to hearing today there will be a specific additional package for fishers under the Living Wage Transitional Support Package. The decision facing members today is whether the immediate economic viability of the scallop dredging fleet outweighs the long-term sustainability of the overall fishing industry and the protection of internationally recognised vulnerable habitats from the damage effects of dredging. A reminder to that even our current Chief Minister was concerned when in 2021 he said, "I'm completely against a continuation of heavy-duty trawling and dredging. That has to be stopped. It is pure vandalism of our seabed and it is destroying incredibly valuable habitats, potentially carbon-rich habitats that can be nurtured and may make a huge difference to our contribution." That is from the Chief Minister. That is not anything that I have quoted myself at any time. The decision to reduce by the Minister has raised questions about what further level of research is needed by the Minister in the areas in question, and why is the data already available is not good enough, along with wondering why the robust methodology that was used to define the MPA network is not good enough to provide an immediate decision on expansion. This is why the panel has lodged an amendment to the proposition and asked members to vote in favour of all the areas identified in the original consultation to be protected. As the Marine Spatial Plan itself explains, the purpose of the MPAs is to protect valuable and vulnerable habitats by preventing damage from mobile fishing gear. This allows the seabed to function naturally and protects fishing populations by allowing spawning grounds and nurseries to thrive. The Marine Spatial Plan states very clearly that in choosing how to designate marine protected areas, the officers and ministers have chosen the OSPAR Convention methodology, which the panel agrees is sensible, given Jersey's status as contracting party, along, I might add, with France, the European Union and the United Kingdom. I want to delve into this methodology with members, sir, to understand the objectives and huge amount of complex work and scientific data that's gone into collecting evidence to help with designating the original protected areas. The methodology objectives were 1, to protect, conserve and restore species, habitats and ecological processes which have been adversely affected by human activities. The evidence laid out in the plan states that some habitats are vulnerable to disturbance of the seabed surface. A table in the plan identifies the habitat sensitivity range where disturbance has a high impact on sand mason worms, seagrass, kelp and merle beds, the last 3 being protected habitats under the OSPAR Convention. Therefore, it is clear that MPA should be focused in areas where these habitats are found in high quantity. To prevent degradation of and damage to species, habitats and ecological processes following the precautionary approach. The panel believes that in the original designation of the MPAs, the precautionary approach was used, as it is Jersey's right under the OSPAR Convention as well as under the TCA. Politics, however, has interfered with the precautionary approach, undermining the robustness of the designation process. The 2023 Jersey MPA assessment methodology clearly states that only areas with the highest value were considered for MPA candidacy, which means the original proposal was based on this objective. It had to have been, or why was it there in the first place? Using a GIS assessment with a 1 kilometre squared polygon grid, the methodology evaluated seabed sections based on OSPAR habitats, blue carbon, habitat complexity, depth and ecosystem services. Using a multi-criteria approach, areas were then classified into 4 categories: low, to be excluded; medium, requiring further assessment; high, to be included; and very high priority, which core to the MPA network. Despite scoring high to very high in these areas we're discussing, the Minister specifically excluded these areas under discussion today, calling for further research, without clear criteria for what more evidence would look like and a clear end date where a decision would be made. So the panel believes that evidence as spelt out in the MPA assessment methodology report already exists to support the designation of the 4% we're asking in our amendments. And third, in this overall methodology, to protect and conserve areas that best represent the range of species, habitats and ecological processes in the maritime area. This would include merle, which is a protected habitat. It is Jersey's equivalent to a coral reef. But the reduction by the Minister means that the protection of Jersey's merle habitat has gone from 88% in the original MPA proposal to just 33% protected in the Minister's current proposal in front of us today. Because merle is a habitat in which scallops thrive, it is also good fishing areas for scallop fishers, both divers and dredgers. The Marine Spatial Plan states it clearly, so I don't really have to. The use of mobile gear presents the biggest threat to the integrity and viability of key habitats such as merle, seagrass and other sedimentary habitats. The panel heard how merle takes a very long time to recover if damaged and what witnesses have seen on the seabed as a consequence of dredging. A scallop diver in one of our panel hearings talked about what he sees in the very small area that Jersey already designates as a marine protected area, and I quote, "We go 100 metres where the ban is and then do a drift. If you go on the line where the ban is and do a drift and then you just see absolute decimation. Everything's upside down, shells, scallop shells, crab shells. When it is alive, it's purple and all around where it has been banned, you see all purple merle. But then once you go into where the dredgers have been, it's churned up and it turns into white merle and it's all broken up. You do not really see much life around there. It's really sad." An anonymous submission also stated, "The areas of seabed that have been removed from the current proposed MPA are critical areas for feeding grounds, particularly for juvenile fish and shellfish, and crucial spawning and nursery areas for a wide range of fish and shellfish. It makes no environmental, ecological or sustainable planning sense for these to have been removed." So, sir, the panel urges members to vote poor on reinstating and designating all 5 areas proposed in the amendment as marine protected areas. In reality, we are talking about 4% of Jersey marine environment. As explained previously, it's a highly valuable environment, rich with biodiversity. We're concerned the Minister is postponing necessary action. The panel is not convinced that the evidence for the original designations was insufficient or that the changes have effectively helped the mobile gear fleet at all. It's just pushing the decision into the long grass or the long kelp grass. Regardless of stance, there is confusion over what additional evidence is needed and whether more research will actually change the designation outcomes, along with no clear understanding when any further decision will be made. I wanted to draw States members in particular to two specific parts in the proposition that the panel heard most about and specifically request members focus attention on today. And if you feel, States members, that you're unable to support each of the five parts to the amendment, please consider these two parts specifically. Part B, or as now we've heard, Part 2, the basin between the Erosion and Lac Enquêtes has been identified as critical in need of protection according to the methodology document. This area hosts the majority of merle beds, making it biologically the most significant site under consideration today. A sophisticated evidence-based analysis was used, assessing a range of data in 1 kilometre square polygons to designate this area. The Minister has talked only about that there was only desk-based research, and yes, this included Hommel's 1967 survey and a follow-up research in 2010. But it also, within the MPA assessment methodology, there is a map where it shows clearly what different types of techniques were used to gather evidence from that area, including grab surveys, dread surveys, drop cameras, and tower cameras. To me, sir, this is not just a desk-based research. This is actually gathering specific data to find that there is actually a huge amount of merle in that area. So the evidence is there. Jersey's equivalent to a coral reef needs protecting in this area. And then there's Part D, or Part 4, located at the southern eastern edges of the Erosion. It's a critical area for scallop divers who have emphasised its economic importance. They rely particularly on this zone for their livelihoods and have urged that it be protected now to prevent further degradation. The divers have few areas available to sustain their work, and they ask States members to consider their needs as decisions are made, weighing environmental protection against economic activities, because for these divers, protection is directly tied to their economic survival. Additionally, I wanted to address the specific concerns around impact on French fishers and the pressures we have seen, which I feel is making ministers shy away from protecting scientifically proven evidence of vulnerable habitats in our water. Article 494 of the TCA clearly states that Jersey can and should protect its marine environment, as is its sovereign right, as long as the measures are not discriminatory and they are not, as this would be a blanket ban on dredging. This means Jersey is perfectly in its right to do what it should be doing. As the then Senator Farman, and who now is our Chief Minister, said in 2022, I know members may be concerned about France, for example, and the challenges we have been having there, but I would remind members that France and the UK are both members of the Global Oceans Alliance and share the targets of 30% and will be, if they remain members, introduce those targets at some stage in the future. It's only right that Jersey and the Channel Islands, but Jersey in this instance, aligns itself to those aspirations. But there is a catch. The TCA between the UK and the European Union will be up for renegotiation in 2026, and fishing rights are expected to be a key point of contention. As a reminder, sir, fishing was one of the most heated topics during the original TCA negotiations. At the same time, energy is also up for review, this time with the added weight of the recent massive hiked energy prices and clear calls for energy sovereignty. This could potentially trigger trade-offs between the UK and France. And because of this, this could mean a loosening of Article 494, making it harder for us to protect our marine areas going forward, as the External Relations Minister conceded this morning. Therefore, it would be wise to lock in our protection now, so it cannot be negotiated away by other parties. To sum up, sir, the panel feels that on balance, the information provided to it during this review was that evidence already exists to support the designation of the areas which are the subject of this amendment. The delay of the decision on designation does not assist or provide certainty for everybody, even the mobile gear fleet or other members of the fishing community, as it was intended to. The delay may mean the loss or damage of sensitive habitats, as no clear timeline has been set on future decision-making. and the delay in protecting all our highly valuable biodiversity-rich habitats could be taken hostage by TCA negotiations. So protecting marine protected areas will build resilience in our stocks, leading to wider benefits for the whole fishing industry and protecting marine environment for future generations. I therefore urge members to support this amendment as full.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. And we've had a few numbers there from the Deputy, and I don't really want to talk too much about numbers, but I feel I have to because the Deputy has an error in some numbers that she's given the Assembly. She's right that the original plan protected 27% of our waters. She's right that my amended plan, the one in front of members today, protects 23% of our waters. But she's wrong in assuming that returning those areas that she has to the plan returns us to 27%. It does not. As Minister, I have protected additional areas around the island, which the Deputy failed to notice. Adding the areas she has to what I have now protected takes us to 29%, and I would ask the Deputy to recognise that maybe when she sums up. So the proposals before us today take us even closer to 30%. And 30% is a laudable target to go for. It's one of the objectives set for our globe. This amendment unfortunately, takes away the trust from the scientists and managers and the officers, indeed politicians, who have committed to delivering a world-class MSP based on best principles. That's important. We will get there. We will get to 30 by 30. But doing it in this way, proposed in these amendments, will be a disaster for many fishers, both in Jersey and in France. Supporting the amendment will take away the opportunity to refine the MSP. It would also act against the economic objectives by pulling the rug from under the mobile gear fleet rather than giving them time to adapt and evolve with change. The amendment proposals, being an amendment to my current plan, will mean, if they are accepted, that Jersey would have 29% marine protected areas, as I said, way beyond what was ever in the original document. The revised MPA boundaries that I have in this plan have been developed following consultation with the fleet and other key stakeholders. To pull away from what are the only concessions that I made in the entire plan without research based on justification would be to put a wrecking ball through my rapport and my relationship with the French and Jersey fishing communities. So I'd just like to take a few moments, if I may, to just talk about the individual areas, because it's an interesting amendment. It all comes in one, but we'll have 5 votes at the end, 5 which are all very different. This first area, Area 1 or A, is a buffer zone which is going to allow fishing spillover. And fishing spillover is what happens when fish which are grown in a protected area spill over into a fishing zone, so it's fairly explanatory. But in this case, I want the spillover to come into Jersey waters as well as into French waters. Further research is needed to understand the male presence here, and this new buffer zone will allow the fleet, the Jersey fleet particularly, access to some slightly more sheltered fishing grounds in winter where they will be protected from the Equihose reef. I'd like to move, sir, if I may, to C, which is number 3, if I can find it. Here somewhere, excuse me, I'll just get there. Here we are. Right, the Minkies, east and west. These zones are lower proven biological value, but had been shaped to following clean navigational lines put in by me between marks within the shallow reef habitat to create a simple to use practical area. These protected areas need to be easily navigated, and this will help. It is likely that they will contain some key habitat, but the extent and condition of these requires further research. Work is therefore needed to determine if they merit protection from the mobile gear fleet. Zone D or Zone 4, this small area is biologically important, but it's also economically important to a very small part of the fleet. In essence, one boat spends nearly all their time in Jersey in this one area, and they will almost be certainly put out of business if this area closes immediately. Other French and Jersey boats utilise this area occasionally to fish scallop. To close this area without giving time to adapt will disproportionately impact a limited number of vessels. Finally, Zone E, or Zone 5, while larger, this area to the southeast of the Minkies follows the same story as the one before. We have a number of fishing boats that use this area, and a phased protection is recommended before decisions on future access and action are taken. I'd like now, sir, just to return to Zone B, or Zone D, Zone 2, if I may, because this zone is the zone where the access has been fought over most strongly by the Guernsey and French fishing fleets, and the members will only be too aware of emails from both sides in the last couple of days. So the loss of this area was portrayed as tantamount to the loss of the mobile Gare fishery. We must make decisions on this area based on live data, not the models built out from inshore data. The model data, while useful, gives an indication of the likely presence of male, but is not mapped confirmation of its presence, density, or condition, and the condition whether that's alive or dead, because dead male can move around in the tide. And just to add a little bit of context to that, sir, the Deputy made much of male areas, but here's a slightly more detailed explanation of the male modelling and mapping that you have before you today. The male areas, as shown on the maps, were mapped using a habitat model to predict where male is based on a number of parameters, that being depth, substrate, exposure, and known habitat locations. The model was tested against known habitat locations from a separate study to determine its accuracy 2 or 3 years ago. Typically, more accurate closer to shore, where there is more known habitat location data. Or to put it another way, the further offshore it becomes, the less accurate the model is. While the model provides a good indication of habitat presence, it is prudent to visibly assess the merle in the research areas to determine its exact extent before deciding how much of this area warrants protection. The model cannot account for fishing activity, so where an area that is modelled to contain merle has been fished over several years, whether last year or 10 years ago, it is now less likely to support that habitat, hence the need for more surveys. Sir, I propose that we need more research, and we in the department will do this research in the next 12 months, because if there is something to protect, then we will protect it. Sir, while protecting as much as possible may sound a laudable goal, I would remind members that we have a duty to protect our society as well. Fishing is part of our island identity and needs to be brought into balance with environmental needs, but not wiped out in favour of them. One of the issues raised repeatedly by the industry is that the spatial squeeze that is happening to them. Both local and French fishers see the increasing use of the sea by other sectors and the loss of their access, and they're concerned. They see the MSP and the wind farm project as layering issues that will further restrict them, along with shipping lanes and other potential users, such as aquaculture. I make no bones about it, sir, but members will, I hope, have received a letter via email from the Fishermen's Association yesterday, and I'm going to take the opportunity to read bits of it because it says things far better than I ever could. Ahead of the debate, they urge us to carefully consider the consequences of the proposed changes by the panel. Suggested amendments directly contradict the extensive collaborative work undertaken by the Marine Resources team and the local fishing community on both sides of the water. The fishermen, particularly those from the mobile Gare fleet, have worked tirelessly with Marine Resources to amend the initial MPA draft, ensuring both environmental protection and the survival of their businesses. These carefully negotiated compromises included seasonal closures, phased approaches, zones of further research, alongside some areas being closed completely. And I say to members, in that southeast corner where it's so controversial, I have closed, or I will close, large areas completely from the outset. Fishermen have proactively proposed additional protected areas in exchange for the preservation of grounds vital for their safety and livelihoods. The scrutiny panel's recommendation to abolish these amendments, despite acknowledging the damage it would go to their livelihoods, sets a dangerous precedent, says the letter. Jersey's fishing fleet is already dwindling. Morale is at an all-time low. The proposed changes will reduce the safety of the mobile gear fleet to operate due to the vessel's design, and they will inevitably increase conflict at sea. Jersey's boats will be pushed out of the 3-mile protection zone, forcing them into direct competition and conflict with French boats. This move will reduce the fleet's efficiency and create unnecessary tension. The plan and the protected areas were initially designed to reduce conflicts, yet this proposal from scrutiny seems to do the opposite. We have, sir, as we will know, already seen protests from the French fleet, such as the Minkies demonstration last week, and further action, unfortunately, is guaranteed should these amendments go through, with the united support of both the fleets across the water. So the displacement of Jersey mobile gear fishing boats into more distant and dangerous waters will have severe safety and economic implications. Increased distances will drive up costs and increase carbon footprint, and our boats simply aren't designed for these faraway areas. It's also alarming that little or no engagement appears to have been conducted by the bringers of the amendment with the French fleet, an omission which will only exacerbate cross-border tensions. Jersey's fishermen are fully committed to sustainable practices, but they also need to survive. The ripple effects of the potential decision haven't been adequately considered, with wider impacts on crews, scallop shuckers, merchants, and our hospitality sector. Although it appears that the amendments will only direct the mobile gear members, the loss of these boats will have negative knock-on effects for the rest of Jersey's fleet and the local merchants who support all the vessels. Finally, sir, the fishermen urge members to vote against these harmful changes and support a balanced, sustainable approach that protects both our environment and the livelihoods of those that depend on it. So these fishermen are the people who have invested tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds in their livelihoods, spent years learning their skills needed, and who simply don't know where they will turn if they lose their ability to make a living. My plan offers them an opportunity to do both, to move with the times, to see how they get on in the next few years. We've negotiated long and hard to come up with the proposals that I have in front of members today. Accepting the amendment would be devastating for many fishers, and I ask members to reject the proposal and allow me to proceed as I wish to do, working together with all sides for maximum effect. There's a massive amount of time and effort that's gone into producing this plan and the balance in these marine protected areas. I guaranteed to all sides, especially our French neighbours, that the consultation process would not be as they feared. It would not be a consultation where the results came back in, were put on a shelf and never looked at again. Every response was looked at, and where we could, we helped out. I know more than anyone that the vision of a future for a protected marine environment where fish are plentiful, scallops and lobsters and crabs are plentiful, and fishermen don't have to work morning, noon and night to make a living. But in order to get there, sir, we need to make some decisions that we can keep the fleet working so that when we eventually get to these protected areas giving us plenty of fish in the sea, we still have fishers here on the island to go out and make use of that. There's massive pressure on our fishing fleet at the moment. I make no bones about it. agreeing these amendments will put some fishers out of business. I plead with members to allow me to get to the target in an orderly and negotiated manner. These amendments go further than 27%, they're 29%, they are extreme. But I end with this, we will get to 30 by 30, but the important word is by. We don't need to do it today or tomorrow or next year. We need a negotiated way so that it allows us to get to 30 by 30 with all sides being happy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I don't have a long discussion to make on this, but I did think it would be right for a panel member to respond after the Minister. The reason I don't have much to say is, of course, the Chair has given a good summary and indication as to why these amendments were brought, the evidence upon which they were brought, and the legitimacy for them. But for reference to those who aren't privy to all conversations, and none of us are, I've already had conversations with members today that has confirmed to me there is confusion, at least to some extent, about what restrictions within any area designated as an MPA, a marine protected area, will mean to the fishing fleets. I've heard from one member who was fearful that the introduction of an MPA will prevent fishing in its wider sense. And for the avoidance of doubt, the MPAs, as defined in Part 8 of the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan, reference restrictions to mobile gear. This is not static gear, this is not line and net, and this is not scallop diving. This is dredging, this is trawling. And I'm not going to stand here and say that we are calling, and the panel is calling for an outright ban on dredging or trawling. The panel is asking for an evidence-based approach to how areas are designated. And the Minister has just confirmed that designation of areas is a principle he wants to see. And he is equally aspirational to the target of 30 by 30 as the former Minister, as I'm sure many other members and islanders are. The Minister has said, if I heard him right just now, that the proposed reintroductions would go against scientific evidence and advice, to name a few reasons. And he suggests that without full and complete evidence, we are acting in haste. But I will look at him to confirm that is my understanding of what he said. And no head shake, at least, is a promising move. But really, I think members need to understand, as I'm sure they have seen in the Marine Spatial Plan, why they are being designated under which methodology. And page 121, the opening summary, describes marine protection areas as being there in part to prevent the degradation and damage to species, habitats and ecological processes, and that to do so the methodology will follow the precautionary principle. Now, we've heard it is in the right of Jersey to apply a precautionary principle, and that Article 494 enshrines that right in the TCA. It's Article 495 that defines a precautionary approach to fisheries management, and defines it as means an approach according to which the absence of adequate scientific information does not justify postponing or failing to take management measures to conserve target species, associated or dependent species, and non-target species and their environment. The lack of full evidence is not a reason to ensure some protections under a precautionary principle, which we have a right to do so. Moving on, I think it should be important to members to go back to the fact that the panel is asking that these areas, that each part of this amendment will be taken in parts. Members may agree that certain areas are a compromise, a political compromise that can be made here, and they are within their right, but they can choose to what extent. And members will have to make that decision with their voting buttons. But I would like to reference a couple of areas. First, Part 4 or D, which is a little triangle of phased protection in the Erosion. And this is an interesting area that has been included for phase, and I'm surprised the Minister isn't accepting this. The Minister, in his amendments following the consultation of the MSP, made one large change, which was to change how the lines drawn of marine protected areas are. They are now straight lines. They are far easier to follow. They use many key guiding marks. However, the resistance to include the triangle in the Erosion goes contrary to this. One argument was safety. Clearer lines, fewer lines are easier to follow, and yet we hear from scallop divers who come and spoke to the panel that this is an area they see as significant economic importance to them. Creating an area that is without the line, and members will look at the table and see it's kind of a triangle that heads due north into the Erosion, creates arguably an area of confusion, an area that will be harder to navigate for boats than if the line had been taken straight. So members, if you are content with the simplicity of taking straight lines, which I think the panel was in agreement is the correct approach adopted by the Minister, then at least take part 4. The panel received evidence that this is important for scallop divers, and the logistical benefits alone should justify it. I will move on to an area that the Minister did ask for the chair of the panel to reference on, and that is the increase in area that is in the marine spatial, marine protected areas. And the panel is aware that the other areas were included, but the panel also questioned the validity of these. And perhaps a reason. The Minister, in summing up, just talked about his intention to reach 30 by 30 the right way. And part of that is quality over quantity. The panel and submissions were surprised at the level of included area around Grone to the northwest of the island, despite these areas being highly moved by tides, with very low threatened impacts being rocket and sand below. The panel is aware. The panel is still requesting that what isn't included is quality and is of importance to Jersey. And my suggestion that we remove that area to realign numbers to the panel didn't go down well, which was perhaps showing the evidence-based approach taken by the panel rather than one of politics. And lastly, I really think we should be asking ourselves how we want to support the different industries we have. We've heard today that there will be support for agriculture and fisheries, and it is up to this government to choose how it directs this. The panel received submissions that there is still space for dredging in our waters in ways that will be less damaging. If the Minister is concerned about the impact the removal of these few areas are, I suggest he looks at how his government can ensure the sustainable existence of this fleet, whilst also promoting equally valuable areas of our economy, such as hand-dived scallops. And for that, I leave it there, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I rise just to be quite brief with this. The Minister himself mentioned the words about precautionary methodologies in may come up with these MPAs. The problem that I face, and maybe this is slightly more political than the panel allows, so this is more in my own personal reference, that if we don't, research can carry on if these areas are protected. They can then be re-released if the evidence then shows that they are not as valuable as they need to be. This, for me, seems like the better precautionary measure to take. Protect, study, and release if the valuable marine life isn't there. We were very fortunate to have received a letter from an academic from Plymouth University who mentions about 1 square metre of merle can protect, I'm just trying to find the number, it was around 173 species of fish within 1 square metre of merle. So this is incredibly important. And actually how a study showed that this could potentially contribute 3.3 million to the commercial fisheries of both Jersey and France. So if we wipe out, if this area is there and it isn't protected and it is fished by mobile gear, and if that gear does damage the merle, the speed at which the merle recovers is far too slow to sustain the economic environment that the fisheries want to function in. So for me, sir, it is important that we protect these areas first, encourage the Minister to carry on with the research that he is engaged into doing, bring back his results as quickly as possible, and if these areas do not contain the fragile ecosystems, then he can simply release them back in to the fisheries use. Because the problem, if it is damaged, it will never recover. And then the fisheries will eventually dwindle themselves down and we will be left with nothing. So I will leave my comments there.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Connie Bullard.
Thank you, sir. It's fair to say, sir, that I've been sceptical about the Marine Spatial Plan since its proposal in 2022, because I don't believe that government interference is generally helpful. However, sir, I'm always open to compromise and support the Minister with the unamended proposition. I can't support the amendment, however, and my reasons are simple, in that it has failed to embrace the needs of our fishing industry and accommodate any changes to fishermen and the consequent effects on their livelihoods. The scrutiny chair mentioned that the industry aren't homogenous and are in conflicts in certain areas, and it would be wrong to favour one group to the detriment of another. I'm not suggesting that measures should not be taken to preserve fish stocks and keep the industry sustainable, but it needs to be done with a full understanding and buy-in of the industry and those involved. The fishing industry has changed, and technology has enabled us to be far more accurate in understanding what goes on in the seabeds around the island. We've moved, sir, from the period 100 years ago when our forefathers fished under sail, today when we use advanced GPS technology to plot positions of the best fishing areas, and the Marine Resources Department can use AIS technology to plot the positions of not only our vessels, but also those of our French neighbours. I would remind members, sir, that the financial investment anyone wishing to fish professionally has to make today is eye-watering and could be the same as the value of a house. This, more often than not, involves borrowing money with its attendant costs. Added to this, sir, bad weather and market conditions make fishing a tenuous operation where only experience dictates whether a fisherman will survive or not. We need, sir, to give our fishermen confidence. Sir, I'm grateful to the several professional fishermen who've taken time out and given up a day's fishing today to hear what is a fundamental debate which may have a serious effect on their future. Their message to me, sir, is perfectly clear in that there is a need to accurately survey the areas referred to in the scrutiny amendment and not just rely on a desktop study. 70% accuracy is just insufficient. My information is, sir, that most of the merle in the southeast corner is already dead, having been churned up by storms and strong currents, as well as having been fished for the last 200 years. It's a prolific fishing ground created primarily by nature, and its loss to the fishing fleet will have a serious effect. Seabed levels, sir, can change significantly after bad weather, and we've only got to look at our beaches to see that. I would add, sir, that a large portion of the live merle beds are already protected by previous closures. So I would conclude by urging members to support our fishing fleet and reject this amendment. Thank you, sir.
I allowed it pass on the first occasion, ladies and gentlemen, in the public gallery. It's not appropriate to applaud or to signify either approbation or disapprobation. So please don't do it anymore. Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I am absolutely clear that the current minister, as the previous minister was, is committed to this idea of 30 by 30. It is a matter of how we get there and in the time that we get there. And how many people we take along with us, quite simply. Because the reverses that we seek, which I fear that the scrutiny panel are aiming to do now, seek to get there as quickly as we can. And we heard the mover of the amendment saying that they felt that we needed to get there with these amendments quickly so that they couldn't be a political football around future review of the TCA on behalf of the UK. I know that the deputy herself knows that in Parliament everything is political. She knows in the European Parliament and in the European Union whilst things are said to be technical, we're always told, and we always abut once we've dealt with the technical, towards the political. And therefore that of course is what we are doing today. The Minister has done, and his officials have done, a very good job in their consultation process. And it's been an iterative consultation process where they've sat down with consultees in seeking to understand what their needs were and what their requests were in that process. And that's been a consultation process not just been done here in St Helier, it's involved, and they've consulted with officials affected in the UK, in Brussels, in Paris, in the regions of Brittany and Normandy, in Guernsey, as one would expect because of the obligations of the TCA. And they have arrived, I think, at a good proposal to move forward on the route to 30 by 30. The other thing that occurs to me, Sarah, is that our own fishing industry is clear and is 100% certain that if the amendments are approved, vessels will stop trading. That means livelihoods will be lost, boats will be sold, and our fleet will be reduced even further. And it surprises me that there is a line of argument being made in the Assembly today that says, I think it was 2 million that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development indicated earlier, went into agriculture and fisheries over 2 years, that the answer to this problem of vessels not being able to fish, businesses going out of business, people's livelihoods being removed, is for the government and taxpayers to give fishers money. To give fishers money not to fish, because they won't be able to fish. That some members are shaking their heads and saying it's not true. Those involved in the industry are quite clearly telling us that they will not be able to fish and their vessels will stop working. It's always struck me as odd, sir, that governments often think it knows better than businesses, particularly small businesses which have been built up or been in families for generations, believing that it can legislate to do something that the government knows better than the business. And never more is this the case than in the food production industry, whether that be farmers or it be fishers or it be growers. We somehow, for some reason, think that we know better. And we ultimately end up paying considerable sums of taxpayers' money to ask these businesses, these families, these individuals to do things that we think are best, rather than the thing that they are passionate about, which is farming, which is fishing, which is growing, which is about food production. And I don't think we should shy away from the need to have food produced in our island or gathered from our waters. I think it's an honourable thing to do. And therefore it's clear to me that there is a way that we can protect our fishing environment for the future and at the same time maintain livelihoods and ensure that our fleet remains at roughly the same level that it is. And that way is by supporting the Minister and his proposed marine spatial plan. And I really do urge members to think very, very carefully before they support any part of this amendment, because of the unintended effects that it will ultimately have on our fishing industry if we do anything other than support the Minister's approach. Now, my job's largely on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to think it was 9 to 5, but it's not. Some people categorise it as being nice to foreigners. I don't think of it like that. I think of it as building positive, productive, long-term relationships with people in other countries and other communities. And therefore it is relevant to the argument that's before us today. I have had it communicated clearly to me, as I know the Minister has, as we saw off the Equihose last week, Minkies, sorry, as we saw off the Minkies, that if the amendments are accepted, those relationships will be damaged. And they'll be damaged because we've undertaken a consultation process, as the Minister said, that we haven't then gone on to implement or to respect. We've gone over the top of that consultation process and done something else. Of course, I will do my best, as I always do, to put the very best possible spin on why it is that a democratically elected assembly can do something other than what the government proposes, and every parliament the world over does the same. Of course I will, because that's exactly what this assembly would expect of me. But I can tell you now, it will not be easy or straightforward, and we risk taking the relationship back to the place that it was in those very difficult post-Brexit days. But that's a risk that the Assembly can take in how they vote when it comes to these amendments. If we get to the vote today, will be voting against the amendments for all of those reasons. The Minister is committed to 30 by 30. His proposal does it in a sensible, balanced way, and it will take all of the stakeholders with us, which will ultimately mean we make faster progress to that 30 by 30 because stakeholders have gone with us. If we do this today, accept the amendments, we will alienate the stakeholders, we will see some go out of business, and it will make it even harder to get to 30 by 30. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank the islanders who have contacted me on this proposition. I apologise to those to whom I have not managed to send a response. This is an emotive subject. The emails I have received focus on two subjects that really matter to me. It has led to me doing a fair bit of my own scrutiny, questioning patient government officers involved in producing this work, as well as a well-known advanced research tool created by AI. I don't believe the emails I have received necessarily are in opposition. We care about the environment. We recognise that Merle is precious and slow-growing. Has anyone asked for male beds to be damaged? Nobody who has contacted me. It must be painful to see a damaged male bed. But what is the extent of the damage to them so far? Why would anyone assume that fishermen would want to damage them rather than do so unintentionally because they don't know exactly where they are? Because male beds are not only important to the environment, they also are important to the fishing grounds that surround them. Male beds are composed of slow-growing calcified red algae that form hard, brittle structures on the seabed. Not only do they attract fish, but if you are skippering a trawler, from what I have learnt about male beds, you are best advised to avoid them. If you don't know where they are, you may well damage your own equipment as well as an area that attracts fish to the surrounding areas. When I was researching for this debate, I asked the question, what damage can beds do to trawlers? And I learned the hard, rocky structure can snag or damage the nets, chains, or other parts of bottom trawling gear, causing tears or breakages. Trawling over these beds can cause the equipment to get stuck, leading to potential damage or increased wear and tear, and wear down trawling gear, especially in areas with dense male coverage. While recognising that trawling over male beds is environmentally harmful owing to their sensitive ecosystems, affecting the biodiversity and marine life that rely on them, my AI tool said something interesting. It said there are often restrictions on trawling in areas where male beds are present to protect both the habitat and the equipment. So the identification of the whereabouts and the density of male beds assists both the environment and fishermen. What I believe we are being asked to vote upon right now is what should we accept as evidence as to the location and extent of male beds. Should we use the best scientific methods? What are they? Or do we make a stab in the dark and say here, right now, on top of the constraints this marine spatial plan already is imposing on our fishermen, that fishermen shouldn't fish in areas, parts of which may be found on closer examination not to be thriving or aren't quality habitats at all. I don't know about you, but it took me a while to correlate areas A and B of the map that was separately provided by the scrutiny panel with paragraphs 1 and 2 of the proposed amendment. These areas are addressed on page 124 of the document that accompanies the main proposition, and here's what it says about them. More research of these areas, particularly related to migratory fish species and the location of sensitive habitats such as Rossworm habitats, kelp habitats, and male, is needed to inform decisions on which areas become MPAs in the future. There is also potential to explore the use of biodiversity aids, such as artificial reefs, to enhance biodiversity within the MPA. Who wrote this paragraph? The minister? The fisherman? Nearly everyone in scrutiny has experience of how government reports are written, and in my experience, the government scientists in this area are credible in presenting an evidence-based roadmap, while also being passionate about conservation. Mention was made of a desktop study. This is a research method that involves gathering and analysing existing information and data from secondary sources, generally, without conducting new hands-on field work to gain, and basically it's done to gain preliminary insights before more detailed investigations are carried out. And I believe that perhaps might have been the focus of the scrutiny panel in this respect. How soon can that additional research be carried out? What commitments can be made there? But that unfortunately isn't the subject of this amendment. Panel members referred to the number of surveys of different types made in these areas, and I thank Deputy Alex Curtis for referring the States Assembly to the map provided by the government itself, showing the surveys that have been taken in the areas concerned so far. Now, I'm not capable, and I suspect most of the people in this room aren't, capable of a full-blown scientific analysis into the adequacy and sufficiency of these surveys. But I got interested, actually. I started noticing where these stars were that actually suggested that a diver survey had taken place. And they were pretty inconsistent. They weren't evenly spread. Now, others have mentioned that this plan is a political and diplomatic minefield. I don't believe we should blunder into areas where angels fear to tread, and trawlers would wish to avoid if they can. We saw this approach being taken with trees by the former Minister for the Environment. Now, we all love trees. Maybe we would like to ensure that none of them are chopped down. He subsequently thought better of his initial proposal. Because leading a community involves pacing and presenting convincing arguments based on clear evidence that is accepted widely through the expert local and international community. That's why roadmaps are built. That is why this roadmap has been built, with the intention that it should lead towards a destination, rather than blindly crash everyone's heads into it. Who is asking for our fishing fleet to suffer more economic hardship than necessary while pursuing the goal of sustainable fishing? Possibly the scrutiny panel who brought this amendment. Possibly the states members who are considering supporting it. I liken this plan to the work being undertaken by government in cybersecurity policy. Some may argue our community would be better protected if nobody were allowed to use the internet. That isn't a practical way forward. It is possible to have the best of both worlds. That is what I wish for both the marine environment and for our fishing industry. I will not be supporting this amendment, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes, Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going to read to you one letter that we've all received today. It says, it's an urgent appeal to reconsider the amendment on the Jersey Marine Protected Areas. I'm writing to urgently request your reconsideration of the amendment regarding Jersey's marine protected areas, which is being discussed this afternoon. If approved, this amendment could lead to 11 boats, along with their families, crews and local merchants, being out of business imminently, while small fishing fleets have sustainably operated in these waters for generations, and young fishermen have invested heavily in this sector. If these areas are designated as protected, Jersey may find itself in a situation where we have to import scallops from France. While French-flagged vessels are allowed to fish our waters, they are not permitted to enter our port to land their catch since Brexit. This could mean we would rely on imports instead of supporting our local fisheries, which is completely unacceptable. Over 80% of the scallops sold this year came from the areas designated in the current plan. Removing further access to these grounds would not only jeopardise local livelihoods, but also compromise our food security. Sir, I ask members to support our local fishers and go with the Minister's approved marine spatial plan and work slowly so that everybody can be on board, that we can have the French working with us collaboratively like they did last week when they all were at the Minkies. And let's go slowly, let's get it right and vote with the Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm part of the scrutiny panel, a member on the scrutiny panel of IHE, and I started out in this with zero knowledge of the fishing industry and what was going on. And what surprised me was all the publicity, and Deputy Gorst has said this, has talked about the fishing industry. The fishing industry is quite split into all sorts of different categories. It's something I didn't know about that. And in fact, one thing which I was sort of quite struck by was one of the people who we scrutinised brought with him a piece of dead merle, which he said, this is the consequence of mobile gear on mearl beds. Now, so what I would say is, it's not a case of this is all about the mobile gear and what's happening here. It's about all sorts of different people who are involved in the industry. Some are absolutely believe in this, some are absolutely against it. And so there's an awful lot of tension in here within the industry itself. It's not just government versus the industry, it's also tension within the industry itself. We must recognize that. And the other thing I would say is when government does do interfere, and I'm a marketeer here, I'm a businessman, I know what it means when government steps in. Nothing irritates me more than government telling me how to run my business. I can tell you, I can assure you of that. So the question is if government does take things away, what's the payback? What's the payback to business? If we're trying to tell certain people in the industry that, sorry, you can't fish here anymore, what's the payback to that industry? I appreciate there's a huge amount of issues around here between the tension between environmental impact and the commercial livelihoods of fishers. And that's a really difficult tension to deal with. So in the long, I know there is this idea of let's do this slowly, let's run along with this slowly. How long has nature got? You know, can the environment sustain what's currently going on? So the question is the environment can't answer us on that question. Those little mearl-bed guys can't stand here in the assembly and go, this is the consequences of us and what happens to us. So clearly the message, the question is certainty. As far as the guys who are in the mobile gear industry is, what certainty are we giving them? What is government giving them in terms of economic certainty? What alternatives are we offering? What is the plan? What's the long-term plan? If we go on to remove people from an industry, what is the long-term sustainable plan for those individuals? I get it. Next generation, the generation after that. What are we doing to that? So business needs certainty. So I would like to hear the Minister talk about that as well, please.
Deputy Mizik.
Thank you, sir. I've been listening intensely to the cases that have been made by both sides of this argument and trying to get my head around it and try to find a position on this that is consistent with my values, those values being that of social democracy, social and economic justice. And I'll give a disclaimer by saying that this is absolutely not my area of expertise. I do not have a deep technical understanding of many of the issues that are raised in this, but I am a believer that the science will get us there eventually, and that climate change is a existential crisis for humanity for which we will suffer the consequences to devastating effects around the world and in Jersey too, with all that will cause on food insecurity and everything else. Deputy Jeune, in her speech, used a phrase that I wonder if everybody in the Assembly understood what it meant, and that phrase was just transition. So that is the principle that in moving with the climate agenda to protect our environment and everything that goes with that, we must do so in a way that is just, and it must support the needs of working people rather than asking them to bear the brunt of it in a regressive way, which I believe ultimately, if we were not to abide by that principle of a just transition, we will do serious damage to the cause for combating climate change and protecting our environment. And I have to say, sir, that I'm extremely worried that that fight is being lost and that it's being turned into a culture war. I think partly on one side are those science deniers and those motivated by the economic interests of those who are against change. And on the other side, sir, I think there are well-meaning people who have simply been hapless and not made an effective case for it, and not in their practical considerations about how we respond to this, made a case that can fill people with confidence that in responding to these issues we will have a better life for everyone. And that ultimately, sir, is why I think I have arrived at the position of supporting the Minister on this. I think the way that he spoke in this gave me a sense of comfort that he understands those issues and that he will take a a science-led approach and one that seeks to balance these competing interests whilst maintaining our commitment to doing what is right to protecting the oceans around us and our environment. And what has, I think, ultimately persuaded me to fall on that side in supporting him now is I think actually the damage that it would do to break down that relationship with our fishing community and with our neighbours would ultimately harm us in the work that the Minister is leading on and that others will seek to contribute to protect our environment. And I think in doing so in such a manner as proposed by the scrutiny panel, which just for the record, I think they are entirely well-meaning in proposing it, and I'm not critical of them at all for provoking that debate, but I think that the nature in asking the Assembly to deliberately take sites and put them into this plan without a proper process having been undertaken beforehand, I think is one that ultimately will cause more harm than good. And I think the anger that we would stoke by the economic damage and the social damage that would be caused by negatively affecting the fishing industry in the island in the meantime would be one that would be hard to get over. And so that's why I, as a committed environmentalist and someone who wants to see our government go as fast and far as possible in that agenda, thinks that the proposed way forward by the Minister for this is the more appropriate way to deal with this. And that is why, with a degree of reluctance, I've come to the view that for the greater good, it's right to oppose the scrutiny amendment.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And I stand as equally a committed environmentalist, but an environmentalist who has always believed that you have to take people with you. And sir, I have dived on dredged merle beds, and the devastation is horrific. I've seen it with my own eyes. But I also know that poverty and joblessness is equally horrific and has a clear societal cost, which, to be fair, Deputy Mezek just outlined really, really well. So the question in my mind is, how do I balance these two horrors? In my view, the Minister has the balance right, and he has done so for a very important reason, and that is consent. Indeed, it is also cooperation. It is vital, if environmental protection is to be successful, that consent and cooperation of the people who it affects is gained. I don't mean to, and I didn't liaise with Deputy Scott before she made her speech, so I don't mean to labour the point, but I'm going to make the same point that Deputy Scott did, in that we saw the demise of the tree law a few months ago. And I believe that that demise of the tree law, which I still believe today was a good law, was effectively because the consent of the people whom were affected and whose livelihoods it's affected had not been gained. And therefore, we are now at a position, in my view, that we have less environmental protection around trees than we did, than we could have had when that law was in place. And so that has created negative environmental consequences. I still believe, I want the Marine Spatial Plan to succeed, but I am convinced that to do so, it has to be brought in a manner that encourages the consent of those whom it most affects. Do not be under any illusions. The marine economy is on the edge. We must not put it over the edge. I work with the marine industry. I have worked with the marine industry for the past 3 or 4 years, and we are working hard to try to make sure it has a future. It is not an easy problem to solve. And so when you speak to fishermen outside the Assembly and they tell you that they are struggling, I can assure you that is the truth. It is not scare tactics. It is impossible in my mind to imagine an island without a marine economy. I cannot imagine an island where scallops cannot be bought, which are Jersey scallops. They're scallops possibly from France or elsewhere. That is something I cannot imagine and wish not to imagine. So I believe we must support the Minister. He has brought balance to this argument. He has done so because he knows that effective environmental protection starts with gaining the consent of those whom it most affects. And so as a result of that, I will certainly be voting against this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you much, Deputy. We've reached the point when standing orders require me to ask the Assembly whether it wishes to continue or to adjourn for the evening. Does anyone have any?
I propose the adjournment, sir.
The adjournment is proposed. Very well, the Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.